Book 13, Gebados, Chapter 1, Planar Prison. Caused an utter catastrophe. Linley, Olivier, and Desri had just exhausted themselves to kill Beaumont, and immediately afterwards, a locust swarm of experts had appeared from beneath the great Bois-Levis. The auras of many of these experts had caused their hearts to quiver. And immediately afterwards, Beirut had appeared. With but a single palm, he sealed off that hole which was releasing countless experts. From the ashen look on Beirut's face, Linley and the others felt a sense of confusion and panic. What happened? The sequence of events had caused Linley and the others to feel panicked. "I'll deal with you later." Beirut sneered at them coldly, and then immediately flew downwards. The waters of the Yulon River split apart, making way for him. Only now did Linley and the others discover that beneath the great Bois-Levis, there was a dimensional doorway. The dimensional doorway was currently completely sealed off by a black energy. Beneath the great Bois-Levis is a corridor to another dimension. Linley and the others immediately understood. Desri said mentally, "Olivier, that sword of yours just now should have disrupted some sort of enormous magic formation. Look, there's still damaged remnants of that magic formation that can be seen in the nearby area." Indeed, beneath the great Bois-Levis was an extremely complicated magic formation. Because of this enormous, complicated magic formation, the dimensional doorway was completely sealed off. Beirut's body began to emit a black aura, and the complicated magic formation below once more began to slowly take form. This magic formation was thousands of times more complicated than any which Linley had ever seen. Even the magic formation centered around Blood Violet in the foggy valley of the mountain range of magical beasts was far inferior to this complicated magic formation. This magic formation. Linley stared at the visible holes that had been chopped into the magic formation. It had an ancient aura, and mysterious, complicated lines and runes. Linley could just barely understand ordinary magic formations of the 7th and 8th ranks, but this magic formation, Linley couldn't understand it at all. Complicated. Mysterious. After nearly an hour, Beirut finally, completely restored that damaged magic formation. Crackle, Beirut stretched out both hands, and instantly, the shattered black stones of the great Bois-Levis, as though melted by a fire, began to liquefy, then refused into a hole, forming the great Bois-Levis once more. The new great Bois-Levis, in front of Beirut, began to slowly descend, once more completely covering that enormous magic formation. Boom! The great Bois-Levis sank into the bottom of the river, while at the same time, the water once more rushed against the great Bois-Levis, then diverted around it, flowing as it always had. Oliver's sword just then must have cut through the great Bois-Levis and damaged that enormous magic formation, which was why the many experts on the other side of that space were able to charge out. Linley naturally came to this conclusion. At the same time, Linley began to sigh in amazement in his heart. This magic formation's power truly is incredible. It was actually able to seal away so many experts. The art of setting up magic formations was an extremely profound and immeasurably deep one. Unfortunately, Linley had never studied it. Nor did he have the energy or time to go study it. Beirut glanced into the distance. This sudden disturbance had attracted the attention of many of the distant spectators as well. "You three. Come with me." Beirut looked coldly at Linley, Olivier, and Desri, then flew straight north. Linley, Olivier, and Desri didn't dare to make a single sound, obediently following behind Beirut. On the way over, Desri secretly mentally spoke to the others, "Linley, Olivier, how many experts did we accidentally release just now?" Olivier didn't make a sound. After all, Olivier had been the one to accidentally overturn this basket. Although the time frame was short, I think, Linley thought back to that terrifying scene of countless, locust-like experts charging out. In that short period of time, there should have been more than 1,000 experts who had charged out. Linley wasn't certain either as to exactly how many had entered the Yulon continent. I caused this mess. I'll shoulder the responsibility. Oliver's voice rang out in the minds of Linley and Desri. Humph. Shoulder it? How will you shoulder it? Beirut's icy voice rang out, while at the same time, his rapidly flying body came to a sudden halt. Beneath them was a line of mountain ranges. Linley, Olivier, and Desri all hurriedly came to a halt, respectfully standing before Beirut. Only, in their hearts, they were extremely shocked. Just then, Olivier had been mentally communicating with Desri and Linley. However, Beirut had heard it. Olivier, do you know how great a disaster you have caused? Beirut sneered coldly. Olivier ground his teeth, forcing himself to raise his head to look up at Beirut. Lord Beirut, I will work hard to shoulder all of the consequences. Shoulder them? You aren't even capable of repairing that great ceiling formation, one which an overgod set up. And you think you will shoulder the responsibility? Beirut said with a cold sneer. An overgod set up? Linley and the others were utterly stunned, their mouths gaping. Overgods were far too distant a concept for them. They were part of the laws of the universe itself. This time, it seems we really screwed up. Linley had the sense that this time, they really had caused a disaster. Just repairing that great ceiling formation requires one to have the power of a high god. Olivier, are you able to repair that formation? Beirut glanced at him coldly. Even Olivier, at this point, no longer dared to make a sound. He, too, knew that this time, the situation really was severe. But Linley suddenly had a thought. Clearly, Beirut should be a high god. Linley came to this conclusion. Lord Beirut. Linley spoke as he looked at Beirut. Speak. Beirut nodded faintly. Lord Beirut, I wonder what plane that dimensional gateway leads to. Linley asked with curiosity. Why is it that so many deities came out of it, and also, all these years, why have so many outsider experts appeared? Linley and the other two had their hearts filled with questions. Beirut glanced at them. Actually, this isn't a big secret. The deities who came a few years ago and the ones released just now all came from the Gebados Planar Prison. Gebados Planar Prison? Linley had heard this name come up several times. Dylan had come from this place as well. Might I ask what sort of a place the Gebados Planar Prison is? Why are there so many experts there, who would come to our Yulon plane? Linley asked. Meanwhile, Olivier and Desri didn't dare to make a sound. Desri's heart quivered whenever he so much as looked at Beirut, while Olivier knew that this time, he was the one who had caused this disaster. Thus, of the three of them, only Linley dared to speak at this time. This Gebados Planar Prison, as a matter of fact, Beirut shook his head with a smile. In truth, it is part of the Yulon plane. Part of? Linley and the others were astonished. Beirut stared into the distance. He seemed to be speaking to himself. Within this boundless, infinite universe, there are countless common planes. Every single one of those common planes has an interconnected planar prison. The material plane and the planar prison, combined, form two sides of a whole. Linley, Desri, and Olivier could hardly believe it. They had originally believed that the Gebados Planar Prison had to be a planar prison located somewhere in the universe that was used for the purpose of imprisoning experts. But from the sound of it, every single material plane had a planar prison. They were two sides of the same entity. Linley, do the three of you have any idea how long the Yulon plane has existed for? Beirut looked towards Linley and the others. Linley, Olivier, and Desri looked at each other, somewhat lost. How could any of them know how long the Yulon plane had existed for? Even ancient, incomplete historical records went back as far as hundreds of thousands of years. I'll tell you. I myself have lived in the Yulon plane for millions of years. Beirut said. As for how long the Yulon Plain has existed for, that figure is unimaginable to you. 100 million years. Linley stated a number he felt was very large. 100 million years truly was a long time. 100 million years. Beirut shook his head disdainfully. Let me tell you. This Yulon material plane has experienced countless troubles. Long ago, this world was actually 90% land. 90% land? But by now, the ocean areas by themselves made up more than 90%. How had the world changed into a sea world? This land has gone through countless eras. The eras which I know about include the Beastman era, the Savage era, one era after another. Although humans appeared a very, very long time ago, in truth, humans only became the dominant species on the Yulon continent less than 100 million years ago. Linley and the others all listened quietly, not daring to speak. Let me tell you. This material plane was formed by nature. It wasn't formed by a sovereign or the overgods. The countless material planes which nature formed have existed for even longer than even the 7 divine plane and the 4 higher planes. Beirut said solemnly. Linley secretly nodded. If it had been naturally formed, then of course it would have been formed long ago, in the beginning of the universe. The exact number, I can't be sure about. But I know for sure that this Yulon plane has existed for at least 100 million years, 10 quadrillion. Beirut couldn't help but feel excited as he spoke. Linley and the others were utterly stunned. 10 quadrillion years? So easy to say. It was just a number. But in reality, it was unbelievable. To be precise, even if the Yulon continent produced only a single deity every 10,000 years, which wasn't actually the case, in 10 quadrillion years, the number of deities which the Yulon continent had produced should have exceeded 1 trillion. And this was just the Yulon continent. 10 quadrillion years is just based on what I know. If you want to know the exact number of years, you would most likely have to go ask one of the overgods. Beirut was certain of this. After all, even sovereigns only slowly appeared afterwards. As for the 4 overgods, they were personifications of 4 major rules of the universe. When the universe had formed, the overgods had appeared as well. Only they would know exactly how long the material planes had existed for. Linley forced himself to take a deep breath and calm down his beating heart. Desri and Olivier were doing the same thing. They were all heroic figures of this era, but in the face of the countless experts which had appeared over as time had flowed on over the past 10 quadrillion years, they were most likely just ordinary figures. Astonished, Beirut laughed coldly. For every material plane, there is a planar prison. The Gebados Planar Prison is the matching plane for our Yulon plane. In the history of our Yulon plane, if any saints or deities angered the planar overseer, the planar overseer would imprison them into the planar prison. The planar overseer. Linley couldn't help but think of that Hodan. Beirut said calmly, but of course, sometimes there are special circumstances. The planar overseer of the Yulon plane is Hodan. But this is my homeland. Naturally, the matters of the Yulon plane are for me to control. They aren't up to that Hodan to decide. Intentionally or unintentionally, the experts who offended the planar overseers were all imprisoned there. Although it doesn't happen frequently, they will slowly accumulate to a frightening number. Beirut sighed. Just the number of experts I personally threw into the Gebados Planar Prison during these past 10,000 years, when I have been in charge of the Yulon plane, add up to over 1,000. But of course, there are some special circumstances and reasons for that. Normally speaking, only a few will be imprisoned every 10,000 years. Those who are imprisoned are all saints at the very least. They won't starve to death. Even if they don't break through, they have limitless lives. Beirut looked at Linley and the others. Linley, think about it. Even if only 3 are imprisoned every 10,000 years, over 10 quadrillion years, How many will have been imprisoned there? Linley and the others did the quick mental calculations. Instantly, they were stunned. This number was simply too astonishing. Book 13, Gebados, Chapter 2, Departure. Beirut continued, in the Gebados Planar Prison, 99% of experts will die from either the environment or be killed by others. But despite that, the number of experts in the Gebados Planar Prison is still astonishing. All of these experts share a common desire: to leave the planar prison. In the material planes, upon reaching the saint level, one is qualified to leave the material plane and head to the divine planes and higher planes. However, in the planar prisons, even if one becomes a high god, one isn't qualified to leave. Beirut sighed. Linley, Desri, and Olivier thought back once more to that scene when the great Botalevi had been broken open. Back. We are back. Those crazed, overjoyed calls still reverberated in their ears. From those voices, Linley could completely sense the excitement and joy of those experts who had just fled from the planar prison. So if one is imprisoned, one will never be able to leave, ever? Linley asked. Of course not. Beirut shook his head. After being imprisoned into the Gebados Planar Prison, there are 3 methods by which one can escape. In addition, according to the rules, once one has escaped, even the planar overseer isn't qualified to imprison them into it again. 3 methods. Linley was rather surprised. So it was not only possible to escape, there were 3 methods for doing so. The first method is to reach the level of high god, and then chop a dimensional hole in the planar prison, then enter the realm of chaotic space between planes. It is a matter of luck. High gods can remain alive for a fairly long period of time within the chaotic space. If they are lucky, they might be able to flee to another plane. If they are unlucky, they will die within the chaotic space. Linley's heart shook. After training to the high god level, one could go try their luck in chaotic space. Chaotic space was the most dangerous place of all. Going there was nothing short of throwing one's life away. But of course, although this method is the simplest, there aren't many who dare to try it. Beirut continued. The second method. Because the Ulan plane and the planar prison are 2 sides of the same whole, aside from the dimensional gates that link them up, there are quite a few places where the 2 planes touch. The places where these 2 planes touch are known as areas where the walls of reality are thin. Beirut chuckled. Much like 2 pieces of paper that are folded between each other. If an expert is in the planar prison and is able to tear a hole, he'll be able to escape through that temporary hole. They'll instantly charge through that hole, which will instantly repair itself afterwards. Detelin, Beaumont, and those other experts who came to the Ulan plane a few years ago all used this method to come to the Ulan plane. Linley now understood. Actually, every single area where the planar walls are weak has been sealed off. They won't be easily broken through. Beirut sighed. The Gebados Planar Prison and our Ulan plane have, in total, 9 places where the planar walls are weak. All 9 of those places had been sealed. But Linley. Beirut looked at Linley. When you were young and entered the mountain range of magical beasts, didn't you draw out a sword? Linley immediately thought back to the scene of his trip to the Foggy Valley. In that place, he had awoken the dragon blood in his veins, and also had discovered blood violet. At that time, when Grandpa Douring had seen the enormous magical formation which blood violet had been stuck into, he had been shocked as well. That formation was even more powerful than saint-level magic formations. Lord Beirut, are you saying? Linley, utterly shocked, stared with round eyes. Beirut nodded. Right. When you drew that sword out, the magical formation which surrounded blood violet naturally was damaged. There are many people in the planar prison, and naturally there were people in the area near the weak planar walls. Detelin was there as well. He was the only deity located close to it. Naturally, he was the first to discover it, and thus he arrived in the Ulan continent. It was me. It was actually me. Linley's mind was in a state of utter chaos. So the reason for the Apocalypse Day has been his pulling out of Blood Violet. The descent of so many outsider experts also had to do with him as well. He now began to understand why it was that Dylan's 3 children, the 6-eyed golden eye lions, had thanked him. These areas with thin planar walls are very hard to find. Thus, only later on, people slowly began to flee into the Yulon Plain. Beirut sighed. At that time, I was in no hurry to close it off. I felt that those people who had been imprisoned in the Gebados Planar Prison were quite pitiable. It was fine if a few of them could occasionally escape. It was lonely at the top. In a place like the Yulon Plain, who could possibly be a match for him? After discovering that Linley had accidentally damaged that great ceiling formation, Beirut had actually treated it as watching an amusing game. He wanted to see how many could escape. The first method is throwing one's life away. The second method is luck. Linley and the others felt sad on behalf of those people locked into the planar prison. The third method? Linley asked. Beirut glanced at Olivier. The third method is, when the population of the planar prison has reached too high of a level, then sometimes, the ceiling magic formation will be temporarily disrupted, opening the dimensional gateway for a brief moment and allowing a few people out before sealing the dimensional gateway once again, then repairing the ceiling magic formation, like what I did just now. But something like this happens only once every hundreds of millions of years. Linley, Olivier, and Desri all felt relaxed. Since the high-level people would also occasionally open the dimensional gateway, it seemed that Olivier hadn't committed too grave a sin. This was just a premature opening, right? Those people who fled need to thank you. Beirut sneered as he looked at Olivier. Olivier remained silent. If I had voluntarily opened the gateway, I would have surrounded that gateway. At least I would have known the details of every single person who came out, and none of them would have been able to escape. Beirut glanced at Olivier. Demigods and gods aren't an issue. I can find them with my divine sense. That isn't a problem. But if there are some astonishingly powerful high gods who lie in hiding, preventing me from finding them with my divine sense, then things will become problematic. Beirut didn't worry about demigods and gods making trouble. What he worried about was high gods causing trouble. In such a short period of time, perhaps there didn't happen to be any high gods present at that dimensional gateway. It shouldn't be that coincidental, right? Linley said. Whatever. I can't be bothered about it. Beirut sneered coldly. When O'Brien, Catherine, and the others return, I'll see how they deal with this mess. The 3 of you, you better listen up. You are only demigods. These days, in the continent, there are now quite a few people capable of killing you. Linley and the others could do nothing but listen. Go back. Beirut's body flickered, then disappeared. Only Linley, Desri, and Olivier were left, standing there in mid-air. Olivier, that sword blow of yours really was powerful. You released so many experts in an instant with it. Desri pursed his lips in a smile. He didn't feel too much pressure. He was hidden away within a small mountain village. As long as he didn't offend others, he probably would be fine. Oliver's face was very gloomy. Linley. Sorry. Linley laughed bitterly. Of the 3 of them, he was the worst off. Olivier had released so many deities. Some of whom most likely would want to enjoy worldly power. How many problems would his enormous barrack empire face? Linley didn't even dare to think about it. All I can do is deal with it one step at a time. Linley said. Gentlemen, I'm returning to Dragonblood Castle. I'll go as well. Olivier said. I caused this problem. If anything happens in the barrack empire, I can't just pretend it has nothing to do with me. If the 3 of us are together, we'll pose a bit more of a threat to others. Desri said with a laugh. Linley didn't decline. Currently, in the Yulan continent, the three of them were now just a small force. There were many people more powerful than them. Only if they stayed together as a group would they be able to have a bit of a footing. The three flew directly towards Dragonblood Castle. Dragonblood Castle. A group of people were there, Delia included, all of them worrying. Delia was blaming herself as well. I've been fusing with this divine spark for over 10 years, but I still haven't succeeded. Whenever something like this happens, it's always Linley who has to go deal with it by himself. Delia wanted to help Linley as well. I hope Linley is fine. Delia prayed. Lord Linley is back. Gates was the first to shout out. Delia's eyes instantly lit up. Wharton, Taylor, and the others all went to welcome him. Linley, Desri, and Olivier landed in the castle. Linley, you succeeded. Delia immediately called out, and the people all fell silent. Linley nodded with a smile. Haha, I knew father would definitely succeed. Taylor shouted excitedly. But, Linley's voice rang out again. Father, you have more good news. Taylor's face was covered in smiles, but Linley said solemnly, on this trip, although we killed Beaumont, shortly afterwards, many experts descended upon the Yulan continent. Amongst them are many deities who could probably kill Beaumont with a single finger. Utter silence. Taylor, Delia, and the others had a look of shock on their faces. No matter how weak Beaumont was, he was still a deity. Kill Beaumont with a single finger? For now, it's best if no one goes out. Everyone stay here, within the castle. Linley instructed. Yes. The people of Dragonblood Castle now also sensed that the current Yulan continent had just sank into a tempest of wind and rain. It would be very hard for them to just be able to protect themselves. The Arctic ice cap. A white-haired old man dressed in a sky-blue robe was hovering at the peak of an iceberg. It was the planar overseer, Hodan. Haha, so many experts came at once. Hodan's face was covered in smiles. Saints and deities, I am Hodan, the planar overseer. Everyone who wishes to depart for the 4 higher planes or the 7 divine planes, quickly come to the Arctic ice cap. Hodan's voice rang out in the minds of every single saint and deity in the Yulan continent. Many of those who had fled to the Yulan plane from the Gebados Planar Prison wanted to head to the higher planes. They had been trapped in that detestable prison for far, far too long. Second brother, you really are going to leave? 2 golden-haired experts were hovering in mid-air. The slightly thinner one was a little bit frantic. Second brother, although we were trapped in that planar prison for 100 million years and you want to go to other planes, haven't you heard? 10,000 years ago, a major event occurred in our homeland. That necropolis of the gods holds many treasures within it, including divine artifacts, and even divine sparks. If we go to another plane, we'll have no connections, and even if there are treasures there, we won't have a chance to get them. The muscular, golden-haired expert shook his head. Third brother, we are very lucky to have escaped Gebados. And you want to go to the necropolis of the gods? Its treasures aren't so easily acquired. Enough, third brother. I am preparing to go to the infernal realm. Whenever you are done with your matters, if you want to look for me, come find me in the infernal realm. The gold-haired expert said nothing else. He directly flew towards the north. The skinnier golden-haired man watched his second brother leave. He murmured, "Second brother, just wait and see. By the next time we meet, I will definitely be a high god." One figure after another flew in the air above the North Sea. They included full gods and demigods, but most of course were saints. How are there so many? Amongst the crowd of experts, there was a golden-haired, middle-aged man with a solemn face and a long robe. From his appearance, he clearly came from a noble lineage. He had actually only trained for 100 years, and had just reached the saint level not long ago. Our Yulan continent has this many experts. This middle-aged man's heart was quivering. The number of experts he had personally seen had already been over 200. In the distance, even more figures could be seen. In addition, the auras emanating from those experts that flew past him in the blink of an eye made his heart shake. This speed, the middle-aged man was stunned. Many experts flashed past him, disappearing into the northern horizons, almost all of them more than 10 times faster than him, if not more. Many of them were deities. The middle-aged man was only able to hazily sense their forms pass by. Haha, it's been a million years. I finally am going to the higher planes. How many years has it been? Haha, I'm finally achieving my heart's desire. The skies were occasionally filled with excited voices and conversations. A million years. This middle-aged man who had only trained for 100 years and had just become a saint swallowed. Staring at those figures that were over 10 times faster than him, he thought, I'd best stay here at the Yulan continent and continue training. The 4 higher planes and the divine planes are simply too terrifying. This middle-aged man was so frightened, he immediately turned back and flew towards his homeland. Not too long ago, this middle-aged man had just bid his family and friends farewell, and instructed his successors to work hard. Book 13, Gebados, Chapter 3, The World Changed. O'Brien Empire. War God Mountain. Fane was still at the prime saint level, unable to break through to the deity level. Fane didn't know the details of what had recently happened at the Great Botalevi either, but when those many experts had charged out, Fane could sense their aura, even from as far away as War God Mountain. What a terrifying aura! Fane stared towards the south in shock. The south. What just happened there? Ugh. Fane secretly cursed. The Yulan continent was becoming more and more chaotic. Even Fane was beginning to feel tired from trying to maintain this enormous empire alone. Master! Come back soon. The war god wouldn't be back from the necropolis of the gods for another 3 months. A long while later. Whoosh! A human figure flashed over from far away. Eldest apprentice brother. It was Castro. Castro landed in front of Fane, saying respectfully, Eldest apprentice brother, I have news. Linley, Olivier, and a middle-aged man were fighting with a bald man at the Great Botalevi. The O'Brien Empire's intelligence gatherers recognized Linley and Olivier, but they didn't recognize Desri. This intelligence report had quickly made its way out. 3 against 1. Fane was shocked. Fane knew that Linley had become a deity. No wonder there was such an astonishingly powerful aura not long from the south. But according to the report, the Great Botalevi was damaged, and then a large number of people appeared out of nowhere. These human figures appeared densely in the air, and then suddenly disappeared, and the Great Botalevi reformed. Castro said. He felt this was bizarre as well. But that was indeed how the report had described it. A large number of people who had instantly disappeared. Fane understood. The flying speeds of certain experts were so fast as to be invisible to ordinary people. Judging from the sound of it, it seems as though many saints appeared in the area of the Great Botalevi. Fane didn't even dare to imagine that many of the people in that group were deities. After all, reaching the deity level was simply too hard. The situation is getting more and more complicated. Fane was irritated. However, I won't get involved in any of these affairs. I'll wait for Master to return. In the air above the O'Brien Empire's imperial capital, a dense mass of people suddenly appeared. There were nearly 1,000 people flying in mid-air. Those are, many of the citizens of the imperial capital raised their heads, staring in disbelief. Based on what they knew, aside from wind-style magi, people capable of flight were generally all saints. But now, such a huge number of people had appeared in mid-air. They can't all be saints. How can there be so many? Many of the citizens of the imperial capital shook their head in disbelief. They believed it had to be wind-style magi. In mid-air, flying amongst the group of experts, the leader was a handsome young man, dressed in a dazzling long robe that shone with golden light. Behind him, there was a row of 3 experts, while behind those 3, there was a large number of experts arranged into a specific order. Behind them, at the very back, there were hundreds of experts. Those were the weakest of the group, prime saints. This is the largest empire of the current Yulon continent. The handsome young man laughed wickedly. And they worship someone called O'Brien. Yes, Lord Atkins Adagin Si. A silver-haired old man behind him said respectfully. This O'Brien should have trained for just 5,000 years, according to our estimates. His power should be that of a demigod. The tone of the silver-haired old man's voice was filled with disdain for O'Brien. Then, it should be War God Mountain up ahead of us. The handsome young man looked at the nearby War God Mountain, which had many people at the base of it staring up at them. The handsome youth shook his head. A demigod dares to style himself as War God. He really is quite boastful. I don't like the look of this War God Mountain either. O mighty Lord Atkins! Permit your subordinate to destroy this unsightly little mountain. Behind the handsome young man appeared a youngster with short silver hair. The silver-haired youngster, seeing that his lord didn't instruct him otherwise, suddenly swept out with his arm. Instantly, countless amounts of elemental essence began to gather, and above the massive War God Mountain, a rumbling sound could be heard. What's that? Many of the honorary and personal disciples of the War Gods College felt the awesome transformation of the surrounding elemental essences. HRMPH, the silver-haired youngster laughed coldly, then waved his hand. Boom! In the air above War God Mountain, an astonishing, endless amount of wind blades appeared, forming directly into the forbidden level magic spell, Annihilating Tempest. But, more precisely speaking, compared to the Annihilating Tempest spell, every single wind blade's power was 100 or 1,000 times more powerful. Every single wind blade faintly flashed with golden light, and the countless wind blades chopped downwards. Flee, quickly! A fierce shout rang out from within War God Mountain. But these wind blades were simply too fast. Even saints didn't have the chance to dodge beyond the wind blades before being scraped by these countless, all-encompassing wind blades. Rumble, the enormous War God Mountain, its boulders, trees, vegetation, and the mountain itself, under the attack of those countless wind blades which flashed with gold light, was directly chopped into pieces of rubble. Even the likes of saints such as Castro and Bloomer. They were only able to hold on for 1 or 2 seconds. A fierce, agonized scream. The saints were chopped into mincemeat. Only a few seconds had passed. War God Mountain, chopped apart by those countless wind blades, had completely vanished. In the place where War God Mountain had once stood was an immeasurably, terrifyingly deep crater. Not bad. The handsome young man's face had a satisfied smile on it. The silver-haired youngster's eyes instantly had a look of joy flash past them. He respectfully bowed, then retreated back into line. Huh! The handsome young man suddenly frowned. With his power, he could clearly see that within that deep crater, Fane had arduously survived the baptism of those wind blades. He had managed to protect his head, and the rest of his body was currently repairing at high speed. At the same time, the terrified Fane was currently flying east beneath the ground at high speed. A dissatisfied look flashed past the silver-haired youth's eyes. With a flash, he started to fly downwards, but the handsome young man glanced at him coldly. Return. The silver-haired youngster's body seemed to have suddenly been controlled, as it just hovered there in mid-air. He was no longer able to fly downwards. I, Atkins, am in a good mood today. Since that little fellow was able to survive, then I will grant him his life today. The handsome young man laughed. Yes, yes. The silver-haired youth flew back in terror. Little fellow, in the future, when you meet that O'Brien fellow, tell him that I, Adkins, have taken over his O'Brien empire. Also let him know that he had best not call himself the war god in the future. I feel quite uncomfortable when I hear that title." The handsome young man's voice directly echoed into the mind of Fane, who was still fleeing underground. Deep underground. Fane's body had already regenerated to his waist. "It's over. It's all over." Fane's mind was in a state of chaos. When he thought back to that scene just then, Fane's heart trembled. Those countless wind blades had resulted in even a prime saint like him being only able to survive it by using his divine artifact to protect his head. The only reason he was able to protect his head and just his head was because this was a wide-scale area attack. If the opponent had paid even the slightest bit of extra attention to Fane, Fane would have died. If Fane hadn't had a pearl of life, he also would have died. How terrifying! Fane couldn't breathe. "Adkins. And he wants me to carry a message to Master." Fane suddenly had the feeling that the experts who had suddenly appeared were far more powerful than his master, the war god O'Brien. "All I can do is go find Linley." Fane felt bitterness in his heart. The enormous war god mountain and its honorary and personal disciples had all been destroyed. Aside from him, Fane, only 2 personal disciples of the war god mountain were still alive. Those 2 were currently within the Holy Alliance, and were responsible for conducting the war. Even Bloomer died. If Olivier were to find out, alas, Fane felt a massive headache. In the air above War God Mountain. "Tell me the details of Beirut. Since when did this Beirut take over the Yulon Plain?" The handsome young man frowned as he spoke unhappily. The silver-haired old man behind him immediately said respectfully, "Lord Adkins, in the past, your subordinate, myself, was in the Yulon continent. At that time, I learned of Beirut. This Beirut himself is a divine beast. When he reached adulthood, he naturally became a demigod. However, Beirut himself naturally possessed terrifying power, and ordinary demigods weren't his match at all. Afterwards, I was imprisoned into the Gebados Planar Prison. As for what happened to Beirut afterwards, I'm not certain." "Oh. Your era? It seems that this Beirut has only lived for a few 100,000 years, then." The handsome young man was rather disdainful. "Lord Adkins, this Beirut is a high god," the silver-haired old man said hurriedly. "Although I'm not clear on the details of what happened afterwards, in our planar prison, I heard some news. During the Apocalypse War of 10,000 years ago, he was even able to kill high gods." "Humph." The handsome young man sneered coldly. "Kill high gods? The question is, what sort of high god did he kill? A high god who became one through refining a divine spark and one who became a high god through one's own insights, are they comparable? What's more, in the Gebados Planar Prison, there are quite a few high gods as well. Why, then, does the Gebados Planar Prison have 5 kings? Despite the passage of so many years, no one has ever been able to budge their positions. Those high gods who only know the laws but have no idea as to how the laws should be used effectively to attack, any one of the 5 kings could easily kill 10 such high gods by themselves. Although I'm not one of the kings, it wouldn't be too hard for me to kill several ordinary high gods at once." The handsome young man was very confident. The silver-haired old man understood his lord's intentions. Clearly, this Adkins wanted to annihilate Beirut. "Lord Adkins, don't be too careless. Supposedly, this Beirut is an emissary of a sovereign. He is the one who is in control of the necropolis of the gods." The silver-haired old man hurriedly persuaded. "A sovereign's emissary?" Adkins' handsome eyebrows twitched. "Right. It is very likely that he possesses a sovereign artifact which the sovereign gifted to him." The silver-haired old man intentionally made up some lies. No one had any clue as to whether or not Beirut had a sovereign artifact. However, the silver-haired old man didn't wish his lord, who had just escaped, to immediately fight an expert of the same level in a life and death battle. It would be good if he won, but if he lost? Fine. For now, I won't go deal with that Beirut. Adkins immediately turned and stared at the continent, as though thinking back to countless years in the past and his activities in the Yulan continent. A pity. In the past, the Kinja continent was thousands of times greater than this continent. Even after the Kinja continent shattered into 5 continents due to a great war, it was still far larger than this one. But now, the other 4 continents have all been destroyed, with the only one remaining behind this one, known as Yulan. Dragonblood Castle. Today was an especially bustling day. Fane had tunneled underground all the way from the O'Brien Empire. Only after leaving its borders did he exit to the surface, and then he flew at high speed before finally arriving at Dragonblood Castle. Linley. Fane flew straight into the main hall of Dragonblood Castle. Father! Lord Fane is here. At the doorway, Taylor immediately shouted out, and instantly, a large group of people walked out from the main hall. In the very front was Linley, Delia, Desiree, and Olivier. Behind them were many saints. Fane, why are you in such bad shape? What happened? Linley immediately asked. Although Fane had already changed into a fresh set of clothes as he arrived, his face was still covered with dirt and dust, and his mind was currently in a state of panic. It was quite impressive that he even remembered to change his clothes. How could he possibly remember to look after his appearance? It's finished. War God Mountain. Finished. The O'Brien Empire no longer belongs to Master either. Fane shook his head and said bitterly. Fane had been at the top of the mountain and had witnessed the enemy's strength. He could tell that the enemy's forces numbered nearly 1,000 experts. Your War God Mountain was destroyed. At this moment, a voice rang out from behind Linley. It was Dixie, along with several Grand Mega Saints. Why are you? Fane was somewhat surprised. Dixie, after having trained for dozens of years, had reached the Grand Mega Saint level as well. Dixie's face was filled with a bitter smile. We were slightly better off than you. However, the enemy destroyed the Imperial Palace of the Yulan Empire as well, with but a single blow. 2 of my fellow apprentices who were stationed in the Imperial Palace immediately died. The rest of us immediately fled here. Our Yulan Empire is about to go to a new master as well. Fane. Why are you here by yourself? Where's my little brother? Olivier suddenly asked. Bloomer. Fane was stunned. He didn't know what to say. Not good. Linley's face changed, and he stared towards the north. I'm worried that the same thing will happen in the imperial capital of our Barak Empire. Big bro, then Sina, Warden immediately grew nervous as well. Wait here. I'll make a trip. Linley didn't have time to waste, he immediately raised his speed to the limit and instantly disappeared into the boundless northern horizon. Even the O'Brien Empire and the Yulan Empire had fallen to such a state. Linley couldn't help but fear that his own Barak Empire had suffered the same sort of attack. Book 13, Gebados, Chapter 4, Ferocious. Rumble, black clouds covered the skies, and rolling thunder shuddered forth. A blurry human figure was slashing through the air, piercing through the thick, dark clouds while flying at high speed to the north. It was the frantic Linley. Both the Yulan Empire and the O'Brien Empire had suffered attacks. Linley naturally was worrying about his Barak Empire as well. I hope Sina is fine. Linley murmured. The Barak Empire's imperial palace was the place where Emperor Sina, the Empress, and the others lived. Of course, the imperial palace of an empire was protected by saints, and the saint on guard there was the second of the 5 Barker brothers, Ankh. Linley's fast-moving body suddenly halted, his gaze focused on 2 indistinct figures on the northern horizon. One of them was tall and massive, while the other was also much larger than most people. Not good. Linley could instantly recognize them. These two people were the transformed supreme warriors, Ankh and Sina. Sina was now a peak warrior of the 9th rank. After transforming, he was a saint. As for Ankh, he had long ago reached the saint level. Lord Linley. Ankh and Sina, fleeing in a sad state, immediately called out upon seeing Linley. Linley could tell that many of the scales of the transformed dragon blood warrior Sina had been ripped apart, with blood leaking everywhere. As for the transformed undying warrior saint, Ankh, although he hadn't been injured too badly, he clearly was in a sad state as well. Uncle. As soon as Sina saw Linley, his tears immediately began to flow. Linley felt extremely nervous. Sina was an extremely stable person. For him to cry, the situation must be very severe. The badly injured Sina calmed down slightly, now that he saw Linley. He returned to his human form. His trousers were ripped and torn, and his body was covered in blood and wounds. Linley immediately reached out and pressed his hand against Sina's shoulder, allowing the pearl of life's energy to fill Sina's body. Sina's wounds quickly recovered. All dead. They are all dead. Sina sobbed so hard his entire body shook. Uncle, everyone in the entire imperial palace, aside from me and Uncle Ankh, they are all dead. My wives, my son, all dead. All dead. Linley couldn't help but feel a surge of fury. He had expected that the situation was grim, but it was even worse than he had feared. Those deities, why did they massacre commoners? Can it be that they can only show off their power by massacring commoners? Sina's son was named Kaskasa. Linley still remembered the scene from 10 days ago. It was the Yulan festival. Sina had brought his wife and child to Dragonblood Castle to celebrate the holiday together. Cass had only been 7 years old at the time. Linley had been planning to wait when Cass grew a bit older, then take him and Arnold to activate the Dragonblood warrior lineage in their veins. But, who would have imagined that Cass's future would have ended before it even began? Bastards! Linley couldn't help but curse quietly. Sina ground his teeth as well. I really want to kill those people. Dragonblood warriors had very low fertility rates. For example, Linley only had Taylor and Sasha, the two twins. Wharton only had one child, Sina. Sina himself only had a single son. Although as the emperor of an empire, he had quite a few women, he only had this single son. Uncle, you absolutely must help me get revenge. You must. Sina's face was covered in tears. Linley nodded heavily. Ankh, what was the situation? Tell me in detail. Linley looked solemnly at Ankh. Ankh nodded and spoke. Lord Linley. Not long ago, I was still in the imperial palace. But suddenly, I sensed a terrifying aura coming from above the imperial palace, so I immediately rushed out of the room. When I looked upwards, I saw, roughly 100 experts flying in mid-air. Nearly 100. Linley's heart shook slightly. Originally, when Olivier had chopped open the great Botalevi with his sword, he had released thousands of experts, many of whom were far more powerful than Linley. Of course, most of the experts were saints, but there were demigods and gods amongst their number, and even high gods. Hearing that nearly 100 people had appeared in the air above the imperial palace of the imperial capital of the Barak Empire, he knew that the leader of this gathering must at least be a demigod, and perhaps even a full god. At that time, before I even had a chance to say a word, the leader, smiling, turned his gaze towards me. He immediately spoke to me using his divine sense. He said, "Little fellow, go back and tell that Linley that from today onwards, this Barak Empire now belongs to me, Ojwin Aogio Wen. Ankh came to a pause. Linley's face sank. Ojwin. Linley had never heard of this name before, but Linley could tell that this person clearly knew a great deal about him. And then? Linley asked. Ankh's eyes held a hint of terror in them as he spoke. And then, Ojwin just smiled. His entire body radiated out brilliant white light. It was like the holy light of the radiant church. The places of the imperial palace which were touched by that holy light were instantly vaporized. Many palace maids, attendants, and guards were turned directly to ash by that light. I immediately transformed, while Sina transformed as well. Under the power of that light, my defense managed to hold, but Sina was badly injured. Linley couldn't help but feel his heart weighing heavily. The light which his body emanated was enough to badly injure Sina, who was at the saint level when Dragon formed. Linley was very certain that ordinary demigods definitely didn't have this sort of power. For a demigod to kill a saint, he would generally first have to utilize his god realm, or rely on his other abilities. That he was able to radiate light that covered the entire palace, yet still had such great power, most likely, the opponent was a full god. Even if he was a demigod, he was definitely a peak demigod. Let's go back for now. Linley frowned. Sina and Ankh nodded slightly, flying behind Linley as they returned towards Dragonblood Castle. Dragonblood Castle. Linley, Sina, and Ankh landed in the gate to Dragonblood Castle. Right now, there were quite a few people in the main hall. Everyone was chatting in soft voices. Dixie, Fane, and the others all felt extremely miserable, but the person with the most terrible look on his face was Olivier. Olivier had learned from Fane that his little brother, Bloomer, had died. His little brother. Their parents had died early on. He, Olivier, had personally brought up his little brother. His one and only family member. When Bloomer entered the War Gods College, Olivier finally stopped worrying and began wholeheartedly devoting himself to his training. Who would have imagined that such terrible news would come today? Bloomer was to Olivier what Wharton was to Linley. His little brother had died. How could he not be furious? Linley, what's the situation? Delia immediately went to welcome them. Upon seeing Linley, Sina, and Ankh, everyone all went to welcome them as well. Linley's face was terrible to behold. He just shook his head. Sina, what happened? Wharton's face was filled with worry, and he immediately shouted the question. Bang! Sina immediately knelt down in front of Wharton, sobbing, "Father, everyone in the Imperial Palace, aside from myself and Uncle Ankh, are all dead. My wives died. Even little Cass died. They all died." Sina deeply loved his son. His only son. Little Cass died as well. Wharton seemed to have been struck by a bolt of lightning. His face turned ashen. Nina, by Wharton's side, also couldn't believe it. The youngest generation of the Barrack clan was just composed of Arnold and Cass, those two kids. Both Linley and Wharton deeply adored these little treasures. Arnold usually was with his father, Taylor, in Dragonblood Castle. As for Cass, he normally lived with his father and mother in the Imperial Palace. "Big bro, we must get revenge." Wharton looked at Linley. But Linley was silent. "Father, uncle." Sina was slowly beginning to recover from the grips of his rage and hate, returning to his normal clarity of thought. The enemy who suddenly appeared, there were nearly 100 of them flying in the air. The leader, Ojwin, is astonishingly powerful. We don't have a good chance right now. For now, we must endure. Endure. Linley couldn't help but glance at Sina. After getting a vague sense of Ojwin's power, Linley had no longer dared to easily engage in a battle against him. After all, who knew how powerful these experts who fled from the Gebados Planar Prison were? It wouldn't be so bad if they were demigods, but if they were gods, given his current level of power, if he went to fight, it would most likely be nothing more than certain death. He had already lost a child. But the living still had other family members. Looking at Delia by his side, Linley then looked towards his own son, Taylor, as well as the distant family of Hillman, the children of the 5 Barker brothers, and more. In the entire main hall, there were many people present. All of them were Linley's family and friends. I can't take any risks, Linley said to himself. Fane, seated nearby, rose to his feet as well. He said seriously, too many experts suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Nearly 1,000 people attacked our war god mountain. But only one of them truly attacked. With a flip of his hand, he turned war god mountain into rubble and ash. The difference in power between us is simply too great. Linley, you have to be cautious. Linley. Olivier looked at Linley as well. Endure. Linley nodded slightly. Right now, Olivier was enduring as well. He wanted to get revenge for Bloomer. Perhaps to the others, Bloomer wasn't much, but to Olivier, Bloomer was his only family in the world. But from Fane's description, Olivier understood. He wasn't able to get revenge. At least, he currently wasn't. In the coming days, everyone needs to stay at Dragonblood Castle. You are not to go out of it. Linley looked at everyone as he gave his orders. In another few months, when the war god and the others return, we will discuss things in detail. They had no other options. They had to endure. Thousands of experts had fled from the Gebados Planar Prison, and only a small part of the thousands of experts had headed to the Arctic ice cap and left the Yulon Plain for the 4 higher planes and the 7 divine planes. Many of the others had taken up residence in the Yulon continent. The homeland of virtually all of the experts in the Gebados Planar Prison was the Yulon Plain. Of course, long ago in the distant past of the Yulon Plain, there were elemental life forms, beastmen, etc. After all, only in relatively recent days did the Yulon Plain become as it currently was. Now that these many experts had finally returned to their homeland, all of them had their own choice to make. The weaker parties would perhaps take over a small area and become a local lord. The powerful ones would directly annihilate the pre-existing imperial clans, and with their power backing them up, directly take over an empire. To the experts who had fled from the Gebados Planar Prison, the original experts of the Yulon continent were nothing. They couldn't fight back at all. The difference in power was simply too vast. Even the most powerful people on their side, Linley and Olivier, were forced to choose to endure, much less ordinary saints. The 18 northern duchies. Dozens of experts were flying in the air above the 18 northern duchies. The leader of the group was a pair of twin brothers. Although they were twins, there were some slight differences. One of them had slightly darker skin, while the other had slightly lighter skin. Big brother, the Yulon Empire and the Barrack Empire have already been taken. Even someone as mighty as Lord Atkins was only able to take over that empire known as O'Brien. It seems we 2 brothers will have to find another place to roost. This 18 northern duchies area is a bit far off, but at least it'll be a place for us 2 brothers to settle down. The youngster with the whiter skin said. His big brother nodded. Let's learn from Lord Atkins. First we'll destroy that frost goddess shrine. Afterwards, won't all these duchies obey us meekly? If they don't, we'll kill them. The younger brother said. The 2 brothers exchanged glances, then burst out in laughter. The 18 northern duchies is our territory. A violet gold shadow suddenly flew over, transforming into a violet gold rat king. And you even want to destroy the frost goddess shrine to frighten others. This violet gold rat king stared at the group of experts with its beady little black eyes. The 2 brothers were startled. The group of experts behind them all began to laugh. A saint-level magical beast had come to block them. How amusing. Die. The older brother said with a disdainful laugh. With a sweep of his arm. Boom. In the air above those dozens of experts, a seemingly illusory giant black palm suddenly appeared. This enormous black palm covered the entire area, and those dozens of experts weren't able to move at all. Those dozens of experts raised their head, staring in terror at that enormous black palm. But that enormous black palm continued to descend upon them with no mercy. Boom. It was like striking tofu. The dozens of experts, including those two brothers that had reached the demigod level, were smashed into mincemeat without being able to resist at all. Saints and deities who have chosen to remain in the Yulan continent, all of you, listen closely. If anyone causes trouble or commits slaughter in the area of the 18 northern duchies or the Forest of Darkness, I will definitely shatter their souls and disperse their spirits. Humph. All of you had better know what's best for you. An icy divine sense message instantly spread across the entire Yulan continent and echoed in the minds of all the saints and deities. Many deities who had been in the grips of wild exultation suddenly lost their smiles. The gazes of virtually all the experts of the Yulan continent turned towards the direction of the 18 northern duchies. Book 13, Gebados, Chapter 5, Sound. O'Brien Empire. The Imperial Palace. That handsome young man, Adkins, who had been seated in a resting room, chatting and laughing, suddenly stopped smiling. He stared coldly towards the north, letting out an icy snort. This Beirut really does have the power of a high god. However, he's a bit too ferocious. Lord Adkins. That silver-haired old man behind him said respectfully, this Beirut acts ferociously, but he has the ability to back it up. He just relies on the sovereign behind him to back him up. Adkins' slender eyebrows narrowed. His eyes were as sharp as dagger. But Adkins knew very well that although high gods had completely mastered their law, in front of a sovereign, a single thought from the sovereign could kill the high god. Sovereigns were far above them, inviolable presences that could only be gazed upon in awe. If I could, Adkins had a desire in his heart. In the Gebados Planar Prison, he too had heard of what the necropolis of the gods contained. Even someone as him, who had the exalted position of high god, was filled with desire towards the treasure hidden on the 18th floor of the necropolis of the gods. But Adkins knew. The necropolis of the gods was a game designed by a sovereign. If he wanted to enter the necropolis of the gods, he had to obey the rules which the sovereign had set. To disobey the rules, was to disobey the will of the sovereign. To disobey the will of the sovereign, the results of that didn't need to be questioned. Barnes Banasi, have you finished the investigation? Adkins asked coldly. The silver-haired old man behind him said respectfully, Lord Adkins, your subordinate has already completed the investigation. Those deities O'Brien and Catherine went to the necropolis of the gods 9 years ago. In 2 more months, the 10 years will be up, and they should return. Good. Adkins revealed a rare hint of a smile on his face. I will endure for 2 more months. No one is permitted to compete against me. Adkins murmured to himself, then he grabbed that cup of wine and gulped it all down. Dragonblood Castle. Linley had already informed Desiree and Olivier of the existence of the pocket dimension training room. At this point in time, Linley hoped that Desiree and Olivier would also be able to rapidly improve. Olivier, Desiree, and Linley's original body were all their training. As for Delia, she was in her normal room. After all, it didn't make much of a difference if she was fusing a divine spark in the pocket dimension or in an ordinary place. Linley's original body was in the pocket dimension, wholeheartedly focusing on training the profound truths of the earth. As for the divine wind clone, it was in Dragonblood Castle, quietly meditating on the profound truths of velocity as well as blood violet. In the western gardens of Dragonblood Castle, there were a few dwarf trees. It was a very quiet place. Dressed in a light green robe, Linley was completely absorbed in meditating on the profound truths of the wind and blood violet. According to what Muba said, divine artifacts are divided into 3 levels. The high-level divine artifacts can be described as high god artifacts. Above those are sovereign artifacts. My blood violet should be a high god artifact. Linley was using his spiritual energy to nurture blood violet. He was able to sense blood violet's spirit. By now, Linley had seen many divine artifacts. But none of those divine artifacts could come close to being comparable with blood violet. A deity's power is partially based on his understanding of the laws and their applications. The other part is how well he utilizes his divine artifacts. Although I am a demigod, if I am able to bring forth all of the power of Blood Violet, Linley thought back to the attack he had developed, the Hymn of the Wind. The Hymn of the Wind combined a spiritual attack, Blood Violet's special properties, and the profound truths of wind. There was no need to spend much time describing its power. For him to be able to kill Beaumont with a single sword was something which Linley felt very satisfied about. This Hymn of the Wind, it seems, Linley was frowning. In Linley's mind, he was constantly visualizing the usage of the Hymn of the Wind. His spiritual energy and Blood Violet, mated together along with the profound truths of velocity. Although Linley was capable of utilizing the Hymn of the Wind, in truth, he didn't fully understand the principles behind it. Originally, Delia had said that Blood Violet's sound alone was causing her soul to shake and her entire body to feel weak. Even that Beaumont, when I utilized Hymn of the Wind, Beaumont was unable to control his spiritual energy to block it. Linley had discovered the power of sound. Sound. Linley remembered that snowy panda cat he had met in the necropolis of the gods. That snowy panda cat had been wielding a flute while threatening him. Sound can influence, mystify, and attack the soul. Linley came to this conclusion. As for my elemental laws of the wind, they seem to contain the profound mysteries of sound. Linley didn't actually understand the profound mysteries of sound. When he had originally developed the Hymn of the Wind, it was because Blood Violet contained this sort of aspect to it already. Linley just utilized the profound truths of the wind to slightly activate the sword song of Blood Violet, resulting in that special effect. But now, Linley wanted to focus on researching this profound mysteries of sound. Rumble. Linley's divine power filled Blood Violet, and Blood Violet began to tremble, emitting that humming sword song. "Where's Lord Linley?" "Inside." Gates walked into the west garden of Dragon Blood Castle. The serving maid said with a laugh, "Lord Gates, Lord Linley said that he needs to focus on his training. No matter who it is, without his permission, nobody is to be permitted to enter the west garden. Right now. The only person in the west garden is Lord Linley himself. No person is permitted to enter." Gates was somewhat surprised. So what if someone went in while he was training? However, how could they know that Linley was currently researching the profound mysteries of sound, of the elemental laws of the wind? The sound attacks he created wouldn't harm himself, of course, but if someone else entered, it would easily harm them. As for Linley, he wasn't slowly researching this profound mysteries of sound in a prescribed order. He was only starting off from what he knew of Blood Violet as his base to heighten the power of Blood Violet. If one wanted to advance in a short period of time, one had to focus on the weapon. Everyone is meditating and training. The atmosphere of Dragon Blood Castle has changed. Gates turned and left. During this period of time, Linley, Desiree, and Olivier, the three deities, were all training non-stop, hoping to raise their power yet again. As for Barker, Zisler, Delia, and Haru, they were all fusing their divine sparks. But who would have imagined that Linley continued training in the West Garden without stopping? Over the course of an entire month, Linley didn't leave the West Garden a single time. As for the other people of Dragon Blood Castle, they didn't dare to disobey Linley's orders. They had to wait. Wharton, Gates, Ankh, Boone, and the others were walking side by side as they left the training grounds. That simple, single sword attack of Oliver's released a group of experts. "This really is a huge headache," Gates said. Wharton nodded as well. Oliver's single sword blow had utterly turned the Yulan continent on its head. When the war god and the high priest come back, they will most likely be stupefied. Gates smirked. "You know, that's so true. Both their empires are gone." Hazer laughed as well. "When they are back, they'll need to have a conference with my big brother on how to deal with this disaster," Wharton said with some anticipation. The more people they had, the easier to accomplish some things. Although the war god and the high priest were also demigods, they had reached that level a long time ago. In addition, Dylan was himself a divine beast. If their group of demigods joined forces, they could still manage to find some stable footing. All we can do is wait. In another month, the war god and the others will be back. Warden said. I hope the war god and the others were able to make breakthroughs in the necropolis of the gods. Aang said seriously. If they didn't break through, even if the war god and the others return, it'll be hard to say if they will be able to defeat that Ajwin. The group suddenly paused in their chatting. In front of them was a middle-aged man, dressed in simple long robes. A hint of a smile was on this man's face. Who are you? Aang shouted the question. Muba. Warden frowned. Last time, when Muba had come, Warden had seen him. He's that deity, Muba. Aang and the others were a bit surprised as well. That day, when Muba had arrived, Aang and the others hadn't seen them. Afterwards, when they had heard of Muba, all they knew was that Muba was a deity-level expert. Warden. Muba's face still had that faint smile on it. I'm here to see Linley. My big bro is currently training. Only, Warden shook his head. My big bro gave the order that without his permission, nobody is permitted to go in and disturb him. You came at an unfortunate time. Oh. Muba immediately spread out his divine sense. Instantly, he located Linley in the West Garden. When their divine senses touched, Linley discovered Muba as well. Oh, it's Muba. If there's something to discuss, come over. Muba's body flashed towards the West Garden. This Muba. Warden was rather angry. My big bro forbade anyone from going in to disturb him, but he's still going in. Warden immediately ran towards the West Garden. Warden didn't know that Linley had spoken to Muba through their divine senses. Soon, Warden arrived at the gate to the West Garden. The maid stationed outside the West Garden's gate was currently running away from it. Why are you running around? Warden barked at them. Lord Warden. The maid curtsied. Lord Linley ordered me to go prepare some fine wine and delicacies for his guest. Within the West Garden of Dragon Blood Castle. Mr. Linley, I am in admiration. In such a short period of time, the three of you, joining forces, actually managed to kill Beaumont. Muba sighed in praise. That Beaumont was an extremely powerful demigod. He was very strong in both spiritual and regular attacks. Linley laughed as he glanced at Muba. Mr. Muba, I'm not sure why you have made this trip. Please tell me. Linley said directly. Muba smiled. I've come to help you, Linley. Help me. Linley couldn't help but look at Muba in surprise. In truth, he and Muba didn't have a deep relationship between them. Last time, Muba had told him some information about divine artifacts. As a result, Linley focused on attuning with Blood Violet and meditating on combining Blood Violet, his spiritual energy, and the profound truths of the wind, eventually developing the Hymn of the Wind. One could say that without Muba's information, he wouldn't have been able to develop the Hymn of the Wind. My situation right now really is quite terrible. Can it be that you, Mr. Muba, have come to help my side fight my enemies? Linley asked. I don't have that sort of ability. Muba laughed. I've come to give you some information on those deities that have appeared in that Yulon continent, Linley. Linley couldn't help but feel wild joy in his heart. Linley still had no idea how powerful that Ajwin who destroyed his imperial palace was, which was why he hadn't dared to take any action. Then let me thank you in advance, Mr. Muba. Mr. Muba, please tell me the detailed information. I will be endlessly grateful. Linley said seriously. Muba laughed. Mr. Linley, no need to be so grateful. I'm doing this to make friends with you, Mr. Linley. As long as you consider myself your friend, Linley, then everything I've done will have been worth it. Muaba's smile was very sincere. Linley didn't spend any time thinking about what Muaba's aims were. At least he was willing to help out. Mr. Muaba, you are my friend, of course. Muaba, please speak, especially regarding that Ajwin. Linley said. Muaba nodded as he spoke. Before that, Linley, let me first tell you that there is a city within the Gebados Planar Prison known as Blue Fire City. Within Blue Fire City, Ajwin is a rather famous expert, and his power in Blue Fire City is fairly high as well. He has reached the god level. Hearing Muaba's words, Linley couldn't help but grit his teeth. A full god. For now at least, he couldn't act against Ajwin. Book 13, Gebados, Chapter 6, A Legend. Muaba, please continue. Linley was listening carefully. Muaba said with a smile, the master of Blue Fire City is Lord Bluefire, one of the 5 great kings. Lord Bluefire is a very mysterious person. His power is unquestionably massive, and he virtually never shows himself. In fact, no one can even be certain if he is still within Blue Fire City. In the city of Blue Fire, the person whose status and power is only lower than Lord Bluefire is Lord Atkins, a mighty high god. High god. Linley's heart trembled. He couldn't help but sigh secretly. Olivier, you wanted to get revenge for your little brother, but it's just become very difficult. The experts who destroyed War God Mountain were led by this Atkins. Olivier, kill Atkins. How? Linley, there are differences amongst high gods as well. There is a major difference in power between someone who became a high god through fusing a divine spark and who knows the laws but not how to use them, and someone who became a high god through personal efforts. In the Gebados Planar Prison, the weakest of any particular level will be destroyed. Muaba said, Lord Atkins has been famous for 10 billion years. Even in the Gebados Planar Prison, he is an exceedingly powerful high god. I understand. We do not dare to go irritate that Atkins. Linley said self-mockingly. Knowing how powerful the enemy was, Linley now knew how he should act towards them. What else? The Yulan continent can't possibly just have those few experts. Linley asked. Muaba nodded. The Rohald Empire, after having suffered that calamity, lost 100 million people, and most of the remaining citizens left. There's virtually no one left in the empire now. Naturally, it doesn't count. At present, the Rhine, Yulan, and Barak empires have all been taken over by full gods, while the O'Brien Empire is occupied by Lord Atkins. All gods. Linley felt sourness in his heart. Olivier really had released quite a few experts with that sword blow of his. There were even multiple gods amongst them. I know the god who is in control of the Yulan Empire. His name is Urfaoerpu. As for the person who is in control of the Rhine Empire, I'm not too sure. As for the Holy Union and the Dark Alliance, I'm not too familiar with that area, so I'm not sure either. Muaba said. Linley nodded slightly. Regardless of what was going on in the 2 alliances west of the mountain range of magical beasts, all of the 4 empires east of the mountain range of magical beasts had been taken over. Muaba. Linley suddenly had a surprising thought. What? Muaba, seeing the look on Linley's face, couldn't help but feel puzzled. Linley hurriedly asked, you said that the master of Blue Fire City is Bluefire, one of the 5 kings of the Gebados Planar Prison. When the interdimensional gate opened this time, do you think this Lord Bluefire also managed to flee into the Yulan plain? Muaba was stunned. This, I don't know. Muaba sighed in praise. If Lord Bluefire arrived in the Yulan plain, then that would be absolutely incredible. Most likely even the likes of Lord Beirut, an emissary of a sovereign, wouldn't necessarily be able to overcome Lord Bluefire. Knowing the history of the Gebados Planar Prison, Linley secretly nodded as well. The 5 kings. Linley felt a hint of amazement in his heart. King. This Gebados Planar Prison was formed when the universe itself was formed. The number of experts who had been imprisoned within was a staggeringly high figure. For someone to be able to reach the peak of power amongst those countless experts and become one of the 5 kings of the entire planar prison, someone like this would definitely be one of the most powerful types of high gods. But Lord Bluefire rarely even shows himself within Bluefire City. It's possible that he wasn't even in Bluefire City at the time. Muba said. Muba, I'm very confused about something. Linley frowned. Please, speak. Muba's attitude was very friendly. Linley nodded slightly. I've always been wondering. I can understand why demigods and gods are remaining in the Yulan continent. After all, they want to acquire divine sparks in the necropolis of the gods. But, that Lord Adkins is a high god. Why is he remaining in the Yulan plane as well? He's already a high god. Could it be that the necropolis of the gods actually has a sovereign spark? Linley said jokingly. Linley knew very well that the number of sovereigns was fixed. Earth, fire, water, wind, lightning, light, darkness. The 7 elemental styles, each of which only had 7 sovereigns. In the countless planes, the number of deities who had arisen over the course of endless years was truly an astronomical figure. Just look at the Gebados Planar Prison. And that was just one plane. Countless planes added together? Especially the 4 higher planes and the 7 divine planes, the number was astonishing, far more than one could even imagine. But sovereigns. The Earth style only had 7 of them. Only when one of them fell would another high god be able to obtain a sovereign spark and take on the position of sovereign. But how could someone as powerful as a sovereign die easily? What's more, the necropolis of the gods was nothing more than a game for sovereigns. Would a sovereign place a sovereign spark inside? Even if a sovereign wanted to, the sovereign would have to acquire a sovereign spark first. No. Muba shook his head. Linley, you don't know this, but the necropolis of the gods has sovereign artifacts within it. Sovereign artifacts. Linley was somewhat surprised. Even a sovereign has to wholeheartedly nurture a divine artifact for countless years before being able to produce a sovereign artifact. Can it be that the sovereign who created the necropolis of the gods is willing to place a sovereign artifact within? Not just sovereign artifacts. Muba said mysteriously. According to legend, on the 18th floor of the necropolis of the gods, there are sovereign sparks. What a joke. What an utter joke. Linley laughed loudly. Not necessarily. Muba said solemnly. Linley, you don't know this, but most of the people imprisoned into the Gebados Planar Prison are experts from throughout the history of the Yulan plane. But 10,000 years ago and 5,000 years ago, most of those newly imprisoned were outsider experts. What caused so many experts from other planes to come here? The necropolis of the gods. Linley asked. Muba laughed and said, more importantly, it wasn't just ordinary deities who descended to the Yulan plane. There were high gods as well. Extremely powerful high gods, such as that legendary figure of the infernal realm, the Blood-Violet Fiend. And that time, the Blood-Violet Fiend wasn't the only high god to descend. Linley's heart shuddered. He thought of his own blood-violet sword. Tell me, why did those extremely powerful high gods come? Just for ordinary divine artifacts and divine sparks? Think about it. It's impossible. Muba laughed. That's why I'm sure that the necropolis of the gods definitely has sovereign artifacts within it. As to whether or not it has sovereign sparks, I'm not sure. However, in the Gebados Planar Prison, there are constantly rumors of sovereign sparks being in the necropolis of the gods. Linley sighed unceasingly. No wonder that Adkins was remaining in the Yulan plane. Linley and Muba chatted for a long time, then after they had lunch together, Muba left. As for Linley, he naturally once more returned to his training. Time passed, and in the blink of an eye, yet another month had passed. It was only a few days before the war god and the high priest were going to return. The Barak Empire. Within a magnificent manor. An elegant, white-robed, middle-aged man was seated within a pavilion, drinking wine while enjoying the scenery of the garden. It was the god who had destroyed the imperial palace, Ojwin. Father. A golden-haired youth walked over. HRM. Ojwin glanced at the youth. In the past, when he had been imprisoned into the Gebados Planar Prison, he was just a prime saint, while his son had just reached the saint level. During the countless years of imprisonment within the Gebados Planar Prison, Ojwin had worked hard to protect his son. After bitter years of training, he had reached the god level, while his son had become a demigod. Finally, the two of them, father and son, had escaped from the Gebados Planar Prison. Father, although the Barak Empire's various provinces were easily pacified, the citizens of the empire all have faith towards that Linley. It is rather vexing. The gold-haired youth frowned. Changing one's faith isn't an easy thing. Kill those citizens. That was an idiot's action. Ojwin's homeland was the Yulon Plain as well. He wouldn't act that rashly. That is easy. Ojwin had a hint of a smile at the corner of his lips. Oh. The gold-haired man looked curiously at his father. They worship Linley, right? I've heard that Dragon Blood Castle is the most sacred location in the entire Barak Empire. Then, tomorrow, let's head out and directly raze the Dragon Blood Castle to the ground, while at the same time we can kill that Linley. When the time comes, we'll hang Linley's corpse up on the city walls of the imperial capital. At the same time, we'll make up a slightly altered story. Ojwin looked at his son. This sort of affair is easily managed. All we need to do is make him look bad, then kill him, while afterwards creating some miracles of our own. Soon, the commoners will change their faith. Within Dragon Blood Castle. Big Sis, in the next few days, Lord Dylan and the others will return. By then, the situation will be much better. Rebecca and her sister, Lena, were walking in the rear garden, their heads raised. I really hope the war god and the high priest could arrive right now. Lena laughed. Don't be in such a rush. It'll be soon. Aren't you in a rush as well? Rebecca suddenly stared wide. Hey, someone's flying over. Could it be the war god and the others? Hey, why are they coming from the north? Lena raised her head as well. The northern horizon had multiple people flying towards their direction. But soon, they could tell that it wasn't multiple people, it was a large group of people. There were at least 50 or 60 experts present. Not good. Lena's face instantly changed. There was only a single side from the north that could send out so many human experts. Quickly inform Lord Linley. Lena and Rebecca immediately ran towards the location where Linley was training. Before they arrived, however, Linley himself noticed the many human figures in the air. His face couldn't help but change, and he immediately sent out his divine sense. Warden, quick! Take Arnold and the others and all enter the pocket dimension immediately. Although the door to the pocket dimension would attack others, as long as saints guarded others with their protective aura, they would still be able to block the attacks for a short time. In addition, Linley's main body was in the pocket dimension as well. Understood, brother. Warden, seeing the northern skies filled with people, also knew that the situation was dire. Quick, Nina, don't worry about anything else. Warden picked up Arnold and immediately rushed towards the pocket dimension. They didn't have any time to flee. They had to immediately flee into the pocket dimension. Even if the others destroyed Dragon Blood Castle the way War God Mountain and the Imperial Palace had been destroyed, at least Warden, Delia, and the others wouldn't be harmed. Linley's original body immediately called out to Olivier and Desri, awakening them. Quick, Ojwin's men have come. Olivier and Desri were greatly shocked. They immediately rushed out of the pocket dimension, hurrying to the ground level. Linley, come out. A thick, deep voice shook the entire Dragon Blood Castle. He really has come for me. Linley raised his head, staring at the large group of people who had come to a halt in mid-air. There were nearly 60 of them, with the leader being a middle-aged man dressed in an utterly immaculate long blue robe. His golden hair shone under the light, appearing quite dazzling. Linley, Olivier, and Desri glanced at each other, then flew into mid-air together. "Ha, you really have courage." The leading middle-aged man laughed, and then he swept his gaze towards Linley's group. "Which of you is Linley?" "Ajwin, you don't know me, but you've come looking for me," Linley said with a calm laugh as he looked at him. "Oh, you know my name. Not bad." The middle-aged man looked at him and nodded slightly. "I've heard quite a bit about you. You are indeed quite a talent. I didn't want to kill you, but your citizens all worship you. The best way to change a population's faith is to destroy the god they worship. You should know what my purpose in coming is by now, right?" Ajwin smiled as he looked at Linley, speaking with great courtesy. Before killing someone, he was grinning merrily and saying to that person, "I'm going to kill you." This really was quite a detestable habit. "Of course, the other two, I don't have to kill. I just have to kill you, Linley." Ajwin looked at Desri and Olivier. "The two of you can leave." Book 13, Gebados, Chapter 7, Willingly Surrender. This Ajwin really was diabolical. With but a simple phrase, he caused a hint of a crack to appear within Linley's three-man alliance. Ajwin grinned merrily as he looked at Olivier and Desri, waiting for their response. Staring at the distant Ajwin, Linley was actually worrying more about his family. This Ajwin is a full god. His power is far beyond that of myself, Desri, and Olivier. In addition, Ajwin has a group of subordinates. Those 4 experts behind him should all be deities. It most likely will be very hard for me to flee. The situation had reached an extremely grave point. His life, compared to the lives of his family and friends, if he could protect his family and friends, Linley wouldn't mind dying. If Ajwin destroys Dragon Blood Castle then immediately leaves, that's fine. But if he were to find that pocket dimension, then, Linley was afraid of Delia, Wharton, and the others being killed as well. Linley was also certain of one thing. Once Ajwin saw Delia and the others, he would definitely act. Because Ajwin would definitely realize that Delia, Barker, and Zisler all had divine sparks in their bodies. What to do? Linley was somewhat panicked. "Hey? Just now, when I arrived, I noticed quite a few people in Dragon Blood Castle, as well as a good number of saints. Where did they all disappear to?" Ajwin mumbled to himself in a puzzled manner, staring at Linley. Linley's heart shook. When Wharton and Delia had hidden themselves, Ajwin probably had been using his divine sense to inspect the entire Dragon Blood Castle. My divine sense only noticed them entering an underground area, and then their auras vanished. Ajwin had a hint of laughter at the corner of his lips. He stared at Linley as he slowly spoke. Could it be that there is some sort of unique magic formation underground Dragon Blood Castle that can hide auras? After dealing with you, I'll definitely go take a look for myself. Linley's forehead immediately became covered in sweat. The nearby Desri was also somewhat nervous now. The Desri in the outside world was just his divine light clone. Desri's original body was still within that pocket dimension. After all, his original body didn't have a divine spark. It wouldn't be very effective to use his original body to attack. "Linley, what should we do?" Desri used his divine sense to speak to Linley. Linley was frantic as well. Linley wouldn't care too much if this divine wind clone was destroyed. But if that pocket dimension was to be discovered by Ajwin, then none of the people within would be able to survive. "Bibi." No longer thinking about anything else, Linley directly spoke with his soul to the distant Bibi, within the forest of darkness. "Boss." Bibi immediately replied. You finally thought of me. I've missed you so much, boss. When are you coming over? Forest of Darkness. The Metallic Castle. Bibi was within the castle, sprawling lazily on the floor, enjoying the sunshine. But upon hearing Linley's soul communication, he immediately jumped up in excitement. Bibi, I need to ask you for something. There's a full god known as Ajwin who has already arrived at Dragon Blood Castle, prepared for battle. I don't know what the result will be. But Bibi, no matter what, you have to ask Lord Beirut to protect the group of people who are currently hiding in the pocket dimension. At this point, Linley could only entrust his hopes to Bibi. What? Boss, flee. Bibi instantly grew nervous. A god, Bibi knew the difference between a demigod and a god. Linley's heart felt sour. Flee. Aside from the question of whether or not fleeing would be successful, right now, he simply couldn't flee. Once he tried to flee, the battle would immediately begin, and naturally it would end very quickly. At that time, Ajwin would definitely find that door to the pocket dimension, which would be disastrous. Bibi, my original body is within the pocket dimension. Don't worry. Even if my divine clone is destroyed, I won't die. This was how Linley explained it. But once his divine clone was destroyed, then, Linley would forever lose the ability to train the elemental laws of the wind. This price couldn't be described as a small one. But compared to the lives of his family, Linley couldn't be bothered by it. Boss, don't worry, I'll come immediately. Bibi was frantic. Bibi, remember, go find Lord Beirut. Linley instructed. The Forest of Darkness. The Metallic Castle. Grandpa Beirut, he isn't here. He went to the necropolis of the gods. What to do? What to do? But boss is in such a bad situation. The enemy is a god, while I'm not even at the deity level yet. Bibi was frantic, not knowing what to do. Boss, if you die, Bibi's eyes were beginning to turn red. Scree. Frantic to the point of insanity, Bibi raised his head and let out an ear-piercing, desolate screech. Bibi, what is it? Soon, from within the metallic castle, 3 violet gold rat kings flew out. It was Harry and his brothers. Bibi said frantically, a god has arrived at Dragon Blood Castle to do battle, but Grandpa Beirut went to the necropolis of the gods. What should I do? What should I do now? If I waste any more time, then most likely, Bibi's eyes had tears in them. The 3 violet gold rat kings looked at each other, a hint of concern in their eyes as well. Although this took time to describe, in truth, Linley and Bibi's soul communication took but an instant. The communication between a magical beast companion and his master, in particular, didn't require Linley to use his divine sense at all, that Ajwin naturally couldn't discover it. Ajwin was still staring at Desri and Olivier. Desri, Olivier, you two leave for now. Linley mentally communicated to them. Leave now. Olivier and Desri did not choose to leave. Linley, let those people in the pocket dimension scatter in every direction. Desri said mentally. Won't work. Didn't you see that behind Ajwin, there are demigods as well as 50+ prime saints? Once Warden and the others flee, they will definitely be doomed. Linley knew very well that against the 3 of them, the full god, Ajwin, would be more than enough. Oh, how loyal of you. Ajwin smirked as he stared at the 3 people who stood side by side in midair together. However, the price of loyalty is death. At this point in time, there was a difference of 100 meters between the 2 sides. To deities, at a very short distance, if one side was to suddenly attack, the other side probably wouldn't even have a chance to react. 100 meters, given the reaction time and speed of deities, that was still enough to react and counterattack. Boom. Within 1,000 meters, space was suddenly frozen. Or, more precisely speaking, through a god's divine spark, the light elemental essences within 1,000 meters were all placed under complete control, and began to constrict Linley's side. The higher level a divine spark was, the more powerful the control was. God realm. A full god level God realm. Linley and the others immediately used their own god realm to resist. Although they could just barely manage to control the elements of their own style, they still had the feeling as though they had sunken into a pit of mud. Not good. Linley could tell that given the situation, with their speed having dropped drastically. While the opponent was a full god who definitely had a much more powerful understanding of the laws and attacks, the result of this battle was predetermined, even before it had begun. Mr. Ojwin. Linley suddenly boomed out. What is it? Ojwin looked at Linley. Linley ground his teeth, then said solemnly, if I surrender willingly to you and return with you to the imperial capital, would you be willing to spare the people of Dragonblood City, as well as Desri and Olivier? I trust that my voluntary surrender would be much more effective to you than placing my corpse in the imperial capital. When the commoners see my corpse, most likely many of them will think you intentionally found someone who looked just like me to fool them. They won't believe that I died. But if I personally go, it'll be different. Linley looked at Ojwin. Your goal is their faith energy, right? Ojwin's eyes lit up. Laughing, he said, an excellent method. Linley, Desri and Olivier stared at Linley in astonishment. Surrender willingly. Linley's heart was trembling. So what if he surrendered willingly? So what if his divine clone was destroyed? At worst, he would never again be able to train in the elemental laws of the wind. But he only had one Delia. One little brother, Wharton. One tailor, Sasha. Linley didn't want for them to die. They were what Linley truly had to protect in this world. Linley stared at Ojwin, waiting for Ojwin's reply. Ojwin's smile became even more brilliant, while at the same time, Linley's side could sense the restrictive power of the god realm grow much weaker. Linley's mind instantly calmed down. The weakening of the god realm was a clear sign of how Ojwin felt. An excellent proposal. But, I don't want to let you live. Ojwin said with a calm laugh. Linley's face instantly changed. Ojwin, you. Whoosh. The four deities behind Ojwin instantly flew out, surrounding Linley, Desri, and Olivier. From you, I can sense a hint of a threat. Ojwin laughed self-mockingly. You've trained for less than 100 years, but were able to kill a peak demigod, Beaumont. To have a genius like you for an enemy, it's better to strangle this threat in the cradle. Ojwin had been training in the Gebados Planar Prison for countless years. How could he not know what was important and what wasn't? Since he was going to be enemies with Linley, he was going to kill Linley immediately. Milord, against these, there's no need for you to personally act. We are more than enough. A black-robed middle-aged man said respectfully. Make it fast. Ojwin said with a calm laugh. Two of you, go deal with Linley. Ojwin had a total of 4 demigods under his control. 2 against Linley, while the other 2 would go deal with Desri and Olivier. After all, according to Ojwin's information, Linley's strength far surpassed that of Olivier. Even though he felt completely confident, Olivier still kept his divine sense spread out. He was prepared to act at any moment's notice to deal with any sudden changes in the situation. But Linley's primary attention was focused on Ojwin. He was worried that Ojwin would suddenly attack. Seeing how the 4 demigods quickly divided themselves up, Linley felt a hint of resentment in his heart. Desri, Olivier, whether we live or die is up to heaven's will now. Kill. Oliver's eyes were filled with a fierce look as well. Desri silently raised that slender sword of his. I hope Lord Beirut will be able to make it in time. Linley murmured to himself silently. At this moment, the only thing he could do was hope. But how could Linley know that actually, Since these 2 days were the days of the necropolis of the gods reopening, Beirut had headed off to the necropolis of the gods. It was hard to say if he would make it back in time. The two of us against him. The two black-robed men glanced at each other, laughing. The 4 demigods on Ojwin's side had all had abundant experience in the Gebados Planar Prison. They definitely weren't like those weak, early demigods. 2 of them joining forces against Linley, how could Linley hold them off? Swoosh! Warblades suddenly appeared in the hands of the 2 black-robed. They transformed into 2 black blurs, like 2 leaves gently descending as they streaked and charged towards Linley wielding blood violet. Linley's body moved, transforming into a gust of wind. Countless flashes of devilish violet light filled the skies, like countless violet vipers snapping in every direction. Rippling wind, dimensional decapitator. The sound of countless collisions could be heard, and space itself was destroyed. Boom! Linley's body retreated at high speed. He spat out a mouthful of bright red blood, which splattered into the air. Not far from Linley, Olivier had also been sent flying by a sword. Ah! Desri emitted a desolate, miserable cry. From the corner of his eyes, Linley discovered, to his astonishment, that half of Desri's body had been chopped off by an illusion-like saber. Desri only had his upper half of his body remaining, and a single hand. Even his right hand, which had been wielding his divine artifact, went tumbling down along with the rest of his body. In but the first engagement, Linley's side had been badly injured. Hurry up! The person who was in control of the scene, Ojwin, actually frowned in dissatisfaction. Book 13, Gebados, Chapter 8, Downfall. The 4 demigods under Ojwin's leadership included Ojwin's son. Having undergone so many training experiences in the Gebados Planar Prison for so long, each of them had power on par with Beaumont. How could Linley's 3-man alliance block the attacks of all 4 of them? The 2 of them are working together, while my Hymn of the Wind is only capable of attacking 1 person at a time. The other person could take the opportunity to attack me. Linley understood this. If he went all out, he might be able to kill 1, but if he did so, the end result would instantly become disastrous. The most important thing right now is time. The later that Ojwin discovers the existence of the pocket dimension, the better. I hope Lord Beirut will make it in time. For now, what I need to do is delay as much as I can. Linley immediately raised his speed to the utmost. Delay. Linley, who relied upon the profound truths of velocity to become a deity, was far superior to the other 2 in terms of speed. Linley was like the formless wind, constantly changing locations, dodging past the attacks of those 2 deities time and time again. Those 2 black-robed men were both growing a bit impatient. They were skilled in attacking, but in terms of speed, they were far inferior to Linley. He's rather fast, Ojwin said with a calm laugh. Linley instantly felt the restrictive power of the space around him grow in strength. Ojwin was clearly using his full power Godrealm to bind Linley. Although Linley was skilled in speed, right now, he was restricted by the Godrealm. All he could do was rely on his own Godrealm, but even so, his speed was a hint lower than those 2 black-robed men. Haha, I want to see how you can keep dodging. The sound rang out in Linley's mind. It came from one of those 2 black-robed men. Just then, they had naturally been enraged by Linley taking advantage of his greater speed. Right now, Linley was being restricted by the Godrealm, but they were not. Their speed was now faster than Linley's. 2 blurs pincer attacked Linley. Lord Beirut, why haven't you arrived yet? Linley's heart was filled with grief and fury, but then Linley noticed something which astonished him. The heavily wounded divine body of Desri was rapidly healing, but the power of that silver-robed man with the long blade was far superior to his, able to take even Desri's spiritual attack head-on. In terms of speed, he was actually slightly superior to Desri. Ah! A miserable scream. Desri had just been hit by 3 successive blades. The first blade chop had split Desri in half. The second blade, Desri had managed to take without dying. But this third blade. Clang! That cold, dark long blade chopped directly through Desri's brain, smashing against Desri's divine spark, which was flickering with white light. The power of that long blade landing against the divine spark was so great that the divine spark shuddered, and Desri's soul was shattered. His soul was shattered, his spirit dispersed. Dead. Both Linley and Olivier felt a surge of grief in their hearts. Although Desri's original body was still within the pocket dimension, the death of his divine clone meant that Desri would never again be able to train in the elemental laws of light. At the same time, Desri's 5,000 years of hard work had just been destroyed. If he wanted to become a deity on his own again, he would have to begin training in a different elemental law. Will this scene be my end as well? Linley felt grief in his heart. Desri's miserable scream continued to reverberate in his ears. Arg! From Linley's lips exploded forth an uncompromising, fierce, enraged howl. The devilish blood violet filled the world with a humming sword song, and within Linley's eyes, a hint of wildness appeared. At this moment, he didn't care about anything else. Even if he was to die, he would kill 1 or 2 of them as well. The hymn of the wind was unleashed. Die! Olivier also emitted a similar howl from the depths of his heart. In that moment, both Linley and Olivier had gone mad. In the same moment, within the pocket dimension, there were many people present, including the 5 Barker brothers and their family, Delia, Wharton, Hillman, and dozens of others. Linley's original body and Desri's original body were present as well. The face of Desri's original body turned utterly pale, and his eyes became filled with utter sorrow. Ha ha, Desri let out a low laugh. 5,000 years of painstaking training. But in this instant, it was now guaranteed that he would never again be able to become a deity through the elemental laws of light. Everyone, quickly! The sky-blue-robed Linley shouted towards everyone. Quick, everyone, split up. Everyone go flee in a different direction. That Ojwin can't be using his divine sense to pay attention to the underground at every single instant. Linley was out of choices. Beirut hadn't arrived. Linley couldn't place all of his hopes on Beirut's shoulders. Desri, as long as your original body remains, at least you'll be able to train in other elemental laws. Quick, let's go. Linley charged to the doorway of the pocket dimension and used his divine power to block the attacking energy flows at the dimensional gateway. The dozens of people who had squeezed into the pocket dimension all felt nervous. Linley. Delia said hurriedly. Leave, quickly. Don't hesitate. Linley directly grabbed Gates' son, pulling him out of the pocket dimension. Everyone, knowing how grave the situation had become, quickly fled from the pocket dimension, and then began to tunnel through the ground in every which way. Blood Violet shuddered, emitting that humming sword sound, as gentle and soft as a flute's song. The flute song, under Linley's control, directly emanated towards the 2 black-robed men, as well as that golden-haired youth who was battling Olivier. Both the golden-haired youth and the 2 black-robed men, in this moment, felt as though the entire world had gone silent, aside from that soft, gentle flute song. It was so pleasing to the ear. Clang! A blood-red illusionary sword shot out from Blood Violet, shooting directly into the mind of one of those 2 black-robed men. The black-robed man's spiritual energy was in a state of relaxation, and only when the illusory blood-red sword shot into his spiritual energy did he suddenly come to his sense. However, it was too late. The blood-red sword image pierced directly into his divine spark, the stabbing blow shattering his soul and dispersing his spirit. Profound truths of the wind, hymn of the wind. Although slow to describe, the hymn of the wind technique was executed in but an instant. But to Ojwin, that instant was an instant of disaster. No. Ojwin's eyes suddenly turned around. Linley had exploded forth with his full power, while Olivier had done the same. Linley had utilized his Hymn of the Wind, while Olivier, despite badly injuring himself, had once again released that black and white sword flash that had shattered the great Bota Levi. For the gold-haired youth, the worst part of it was, just before Oliver's attack, he had been affected by Blood Violet's humming sword song. Boom! The mystic Isis word's full-strength blow chopped down onto the golden-haired youth's warblade. The power of this attack of Oliver's was simply too incredible. It actually caused the warblade to smash back down upon the golden-haired youth, while at the same time, that black and white sword flash also chopped down, descending towards the golden-haired youth's head. Ah! A fierce, miserable cry rang out. His head was split in half, and that divine spark was chopped directly onto by the black and white sword flash. The soul within the divine spark trembled, then shattered. No, Kingsley Jin Si, no. The black-robed man's death, Ojwin didn't care about. But this golden-haired youngster, Kingsley, was Ojwin's one and only son. Generally, when training his son, Ojwin would let his son engage in some true life and death battles. Only through this sort of training was his son truly be able to grow and develop. In this battle, his son was only dealing with someone who had just reached the deity level. Ojwin didn't know how powerful Olivier was. He was only worried about Linley, but hadn't paid Olivier any mind. Ojwin hadn't paid him any mind, but who would have thought? Ojwin's most dearly beloved, only son, whom he had loved as much as life itself for countless years. He had died, just like that. Die. No matter how calm and unflappable he normally was, at this moment, even Ojwin had gone utterly mad. The fierce-faced Ojwin's body surged with divine power. The strength of his god realm suddenly raised to the maximum, like countless surging waves, surrounding everyone present. At the same time, Ojwin transformed into a ray of white light, charging straight towards Olivier, a great sword appearing in his hands. The already badly injured Olivier wasn't able to resist at all. Olivier instantly split apart into his two divine bodies, the divine light clone and the divine darkness clone, but both divine clones were heavily wounded. Olivier didn't have the chance to escape at all. Arg! Ojwin howled savagely, his great sword chopping down with a power that contained untold profundities. A devilish violet light flashed. Clang! Linley's badly injured body was smashed flying back, but then he was once again frozen in mid-air by the restriction of the god realm. Just then, he had killed a black-robed man, but had his arm chopped off by the other, furious black-robed man. Realizing what danger Olivier was in, Linley had hurried over frantically, helping Olivier to receive that blow. A massive wound had appeared in his chest, however, and fresh blood splattered everywhere. Linley immediately summoned the divine power in his body to heal himself. Thank you. Oliver's two divine clones both looked at Linley. Why thank me? All I did was delay our deaths by a moment. Linley and Oliver's eyes were filled with the same bitter laugh and grief. They couldn't resist any longer. In the face of that enraged, maddened Ojwin, both Linley and Olivier had somewhat given in to despair. That sword blow just now had included a spiritual attack element. Linley, relying upon his damaged sovereign artifact as well as his spiritual pulse guard defense, had just barely managed to withstand that blow. But despite that, Linley's spiritual energy had just become all but used up. He wouldn't even be able to use the Hymn of the Wind a single extra time. I will destroy and shatter your souls. Ojwin, filled with the utmost of grief, roared in fury as he swept out with that great sword in his hands. Arg! A furious, earth-shaking roar suddenly rang out, and an invisible ripple shot out like a bullet towards Ojwin. Ojwin, greatly shocked, could sense the power of this sudden attack. Where did this attack come from? At the same time, Ojwin hurriedly wielded his sword to counterattack. Boom! Ojwin's body was knocked backwards, and he continued to retreat. In mid-air, there was an enormous rainbow-colored, lion-like creature hovering there. In the middle of the lion's forehead, there was a third eye. The enormous lion transformed, reforming into a devilish young man who wore a long, golden robe. It was Dylan. Dylan. Linley and Oliver's eyes were filled with a look of surprise and joy. Ojwin, having suffered that spiritual energy attack, had his god realm disrupted. The two Olivers fused with each other once more, and Linley and Olivier both flew straight towards Dylan at high speed. Don't think of escaping. Ojwin's gaze was completely focused on Olivier right now. His eyes were filled with boundless killing intent. While at the same time, he charged towards Olivier, ignoring everything else. Dylan's face turned slightly colder, and that third eye of his opened. An invisible ripple once more surged forth. Ojwin let out a low growl, allowing the invisible ripple to strike against his body. He only paused for a moment, before his speed picked up once again. Dylan had broken through and reached the god level, but Dylan was only an early-stage god. Compared to Ojwin, there was still some difference between the two in power. If it weren't for him relying on his innate gifts, Dylan's earlier attack would have found it quite difficult to force Ojwin to retreat. Huh! Ojwin turned to look towards another side in astonishment. Dozens of rays of black light had shot out towards Ojwin from that far away in that direction. This time, Ojwin didn't dare to take it head-on, immediately trying to dodge at high speed. However, those dozens of rays of black light curved after him, and so Ojwin had to use his great sword to block every single one of those rays of black light. A human figure appeared next to Dylan. It was a devilish youngster with long green hair. Dylan, you heaven-devouring beast, you really live up to the title of being a divine beast. In your true form, your speed truly is astonishing. Even I couldn't catch up to you. The green-haired youngster laughed. Tarasi, enough chit-chat. This fellow's power is rather high. We'll rely on your power now. Dylan said with a cold face. Don't end up being beaten and losing face. How could I? Tarasi looked at Ojwin. Ojwin was staring coldly at the two of them. Gentlemen, I just want to kill that kid with black and white hair. As for Linley, I can spare him. Gentlemen, don't interfere. Ojwin had sensed the threat which these two experts posed. Book 13, Gebados, Chapter 9, Timely. Hearing Ojwin mention himself, Linley couldn't help but sneer to himself. Just then, when he wanted to kill them, Ojwin hadn't shown any mercy. Even Desri's divine clone had been destroyed. But now, he said that he didn't want to kill Linley, just Olivier. Clearly, he was somewhat afraid of Tarasi and Dylan. You want to kill Olivier but not kill Linley. Dylan deliberately paused for a moment. Towards Olivier, Dylan didn't feel too much affection. But Linley was different. Originally, his escape with the 3 six-eyed golden Ni lions to the Yulon plain was partially due to Linley. In the necropolis of the gods, Linley had saved his son yet again. Most importantly, Linley had given him a divine spark without asking for anything in return. Dylan naturally had to protect Linley. This Olivier doesn't have anything to do with me. Tarasi laughed merrily as he looked at Ojwin. Ojwin relaxed. But what does that have to do with my decision as to whether I want to interfere or not? Tarasi said with a wicked laugh. You ask me not to interfere, and thus I won't interfere? If others heard this story, they'd think that I, Tarasi, was afraid of you. If you know what's good for you, you'd best hurry up and *ck off. I can spare your life this once. Otherwise, well. Tarasi stretched out a single hand. Within it, a long, green whip appeared. This long green whip looked just like a green snake, and it naturally emitted a frigid aura. Even the air around it seemed to have been somewhat frozen. Tarasi casually snapped the long whip, emitting a clear cracking sound. Are you going to leave? Or do you want me to make you leave? Taurasi didn't view Ajwin with any respect at all. Ajwin swept Taurasi and Dylan with his gaze, before staring at Olivier. His eyes seemed to want to devour Olivier alive. Ajwin paused a moment. Fine. Since that's the case, I'll give you two-face. Ajwin said, but suddenly, the fingers of his right hand swept towards Olivier, and a white beam of light suddenly split the air, causing space to begin to fold. The white light shot directly towards the nearby Olivier. Crackle, wherever the light from his fingers passed through, space began to emit a rumbling, crackling sound. The speed of this light was extremely fast. HRMPH Taurasi narrowed his eyes, letting out a cold, disdainful snort. Whap! That long green whip struck out like a serpent, while at the same time elongating from the original length of 3 or 4 meters to 30 to 40 meters. The thickness of the whip was like that of the tail of a giant python, and it struck directly against that ray of light. Faintly emitting a green light, it circled around that white light, dispersing it. Lord Taurasi, thank you. Olivier said in a low voice. Olivier knew when to be grateful to someone. However, Olivier also knew that he didn't have much of a relationship with Taurasi and Dylan. The reason why they were willing to help was for Linley's sake. Olivier looked at the nearby Linley. Linley grinned at him. Olivier, since Lord Taurasi is willing to act, we won't have any more problems today. But of course. I'm Lord Taurasi, you know. Lord Taurasi laughed loudly and delightedly, while at the same time, he continued to snap his long green whip out. His body was floating and flashing about like a shadow, casually engaging in blows and counter-blows with Ajwin. Ajwin, after a short testing period, became certain that this Taurasi was a powerful combatant even amongst gods. Given Ajwin's cautious nature of never engaging in something he wasn't confident in achieving, he normally would never engage in a fight with Taurasi like this. However, his son had died. Throughout these countless years, aside from his goal of reaching the peak of training and increasing his strength, his highest priority was raising his son. Ajwin's son was the reason for his existence. Taurasi, you are forcing me to do this. Ajwin's face slowly grew ferocious. What is it? If you have some powerful techniques, bring them out. Taurasi flew high into the air, while Ajwin chased after him. Once these two gods really went all out, the shockwaves from their attacks would reach and harm Linley and the others. It might be enough to cause Linley to be badly injured, or even die. Ajwin's subordinates. You can go for now. Ajwin's voice rang out in the minds of those two lucky survivors. 4 demigods. Ajwin's son and the black-robed man had both died, thanks to Linley and Olivier. Only 2 remained. The situation is bad. Let's leave, quickly. The 2 lucky demigod survivors glanced at each other, then immediately fled at high speed per Ajwin's orders. Linley, Olivier, and Dylan were still paying close attention to the battle between those 2 gods in mid-air. Hey, they fled. Dylan was the first to notice. Where'd they go? Only now did Linley realize that those 2 demigods had disappeared into the horizon. Linley's face was extremely ugly to behold. He said frantically, Desri's divine spark. Desri's divine spark is being held by that silver-robed man. Once the divine clone was destroyed, the original body wouldn't be able to be gifted by heaven with yet another light-style divine spark. However, the original body could still fuse with that light-style divine spark yet again. The original body would be able to fuse it extremely quickly, allowing him to soon return to his full level of strength. But, if he did this, Desri would never be able to train in any other laws again. Oh! No rush. Dylan suddenly moved, intending to charge after that silver-robed man. Whoosh! In mid-air, a fiery red human figure suddenly came out from Ajwin's body. This fiery red body was actually wielding a fiery red lance, and it stabbed directly at Dylan. Dylan immediately became entangled by the fiery red figure, and wasn't able to shake him off right away. This Ojwin has two bodies. Linley was greatly astonished. Linley and Olivier exchanged glances, their eyes filled with shock. Ojwin didn't just have a divine light clone, he also had a divine fire clone. The two divine clones battled against Dylan and Tarasi, and for now they fought to a standstill. Ojwin's strength truly was astonishing. Although Linley wanted to chase after that silver-robed man, after having executed the Hymn of the Wind, then helped Olivier block Ojwin's killing strike, Linley's spiritual energy had been almost completely used up. Even his soul had been shaken. Actually, Linley had enough spiritual energy to utilize the Hymn of the Wind twice, with some energy left over. But the thing was, Olivier had killed Ojwin's son, and Ojwin had naturally gone crazy. That attack of his had truly been too vicious. Fortunately, Linley had that damaged sovereign artifact, which allowed him to just barely take the blow without dying. Desri's divine spark. Linley felt helpless. He wanted to chase, but he didn't have any confidence in being able to overcome that silver-robed man. Linley still clearly remembered the scene of that silver-robed man killing Desri. That illusionary blade blow, it was too powerful. Linley had the feeling that the silver-robed man was most likely the most powerful of the four experts Ojwin originally commanded. With Tarasi and Dylan joining forces, it shouldn't be too much of a problem for them to deal with Ojwin. In terms of spiritual strength, Linley's divine clone was far inferior to his original bodies. After all, his original body had fused 20 million soul essences. Linley's original body had already stopped fleeing. Linley's original body stretched out his divine sense. During this short period of time, even saints had only flown less than 1,000 kilometers. Linley's divine sense instantly located every single fleeing family member and friend. Everyone. The danger has passed. Everyone, come back to Dragonblood Castle. The members of Dragonblood Castle who had been fleeing, mentally agonized, instantly felt great joy upon hearing Linley's divine sense message. All of them hurriedly returned. In the air above Dragonblood Castle, Tarasi and Ojwin had begun to go all out. Just this little bit of power you have, haha, Tarasi's loud laughter rang out. Whoosh. Tarasi's long green whip coiled about like a serpent, while at the same time, the temperature of the surrounding area dropped dramatically, and one blue crystal after another appeared out of nowhere. They hovered in mid-air in an area of several square kilometers. Under the light of the sun, they seemed so beautiful. Within an area of several square kilometers, the surrounding water elemental essences had come under Tarasi's control. Ojwin's face changed. Instantly, his entire body began to emit a dazzling, holy light, and the great sword in his hands, covered by that holy light, began to tremble slightly. In the area around the great sword, tiny, thread-like fractures in space could be seen. HRMPH Tarasi sneered coldly. An invisible ripple surged forth from his head and was directly absorbed by each of those blue ice crystals. Crackle, every single hovering blue ice crystal began to emit a blue light. The rays of blue light emanating from those blue ice crystals connected with each other, and each time the rays of light intersected, the power grew greater, until finally, they all came together at one point. Shatter. Ojwin could tell that the situation was dire. He immediately chopped down with his sword towards one of the ice crystals. Bang! The ice crystal shattered. But then, in the blink of an eye, yet another ice crystal formed. This amazing formation wasn't impacted whatsoever. Crunch! At the center of the intersecting energy streams, one of the blue ice crystals suddenly emitted a ray of black light. The target was Ojwin. Ojwin let out a low growl from his throat. A white horn began to slowly emerge from his forehead, while at the same time, Ojwin delivered a full-strength sword chop towards the ray of black light shooting towards him. The great sword and the ray of black light collided head-on. The ray of black light shattered. Bang! Ojwin vomited out a mouthful of fresh blood. With a crunch, even the bones in his arms shattered. Ojwin stared viciously at Tarasi, then immediately transformed into a ray of light, streaking towards the western horizon. Even the fiery red form which had been entangling Dylan fused back into Ojwin, who instantly disappeared into the western horizon. Olivier. Ojwin, swear that I will definitely kill you. Ojwin's angry roar shook the air above Dragon Blood Castle. Seeing Ojwin retreat, Linley and Olivier both let out a sigh of relief. Tarasi and Dylan flew over. Where does this Ojwin come from? He really is quite powerful. If he were to fight against me alone using all his strength, I probably would at most be able to fight him to a draw. Tarasi sighed in approval. Tarasi had also realized that this Ojwin actually had a second divine god clone. Dylan nodded slightly as well. But that divine fire clone clearly isn't as strong as his divine light clone. Dylan sighed. When fighting against me, that divine fire clone was only able to entangle me. A pity. I just reached the god level. I am not yet capable of utilizing god level laws to maximum effectiveness. Upon reaching a certain level of enlightenment, one would become a god. But more insights alone didn't represent that one had become better at using them. Two divine clones, both at the god level. This Ojwin is very hard to deal against. Linley felt that this was a rather thorny problem as well. Two divine clones being at the god level isn't all that special. Tarasi shook his head disdainfully. Upon becoming a deity through one's own power, the first divine clone can naturally reach the god level. As for the original body, it can go find a divine spark and just go fuse it. This Ojwin should have been in the Gebados Planar Prison for a long time. First, he would let his original body reach the demigod level. Most likely, he was lucky and was able to acquire a divine god spark. That gives him two divine god clones, as easy as that. While they chatted, multiple figures suddenly flew over. It was the cold and grim war god O'Brien, the high priest Catherine, and Caesar. Linley, congratulations. The war god's serious, rocky face squeezed out a smile. Seeing the war god, Linley sighed in his heart. War god. Do you already know about what happened in your O'Brien empire? Linley asked. I know a bit. I don't know the specifics yet. The war god shook his head. I didn't expect that as soon as I left the necropolis of the gods, I would have received such terrible news. Oh, right. I didn't have the chance to ask yet. How did so many experts suddenly escape from the Gebados Planar Prison? Dylan asked puzzledly. Even that area I fled from in the mountain range of magical beasts was just a weak spot in the walls of reality. It was very hard to find. It was me. Olivier spoke up. I did it accidentally. I opened that interdimensional gateway by accident. You opened the interdimensional gateway. Dylan, the war god, and the rest were all greatly shocked. The weak spot in the walls of the reality was just a long, large crack which occasionally would release a few drops of water. But opening the interdimensional gateway was akin to a massive landslide that would release a flood of water, releasing an astonishingly high number of experts. Hey! Linley looked at Dylan in confusion. Lord Dylan, how did you know that we were in danger? Linley could tell that Dylan had transformed into his true form to hurry over here. Even Tarasi had been slightly slower than Dylan, while the demigods like the war god, the high priest, and Caesar had been much slower. They had only arrived after the battle was over. Book 13, Gebados, Chapter 10, Foundation. It was Lord Beirut who informed us. Dylan replied. The war god also spoke. When we returned from the necropolis of the gods to the Yulon plain, soon after we entered the Yulon continent, Lord Beirut suddenly said, that you, Linley, were in danger. He said that if Dylan and Tarasi hurried over, they might be able to rescue you in time. Dylan and Tarasi both nodded slightly. If you had been just a bit slower, Dylan, things really would have gotten quite dangerous. Tarasi sighed. Dylan laughed. Dangerous, how? I expect that Lord Beirut arrived here long before we did. Most likely, at the most critical, dangerous moment, if we hadn't arrived yet, Lord Beirut would have helped rescue Linley. Lord Beirut? Tarasi frowned. Most likely, Lord Beirut wouldn't even care if every single human on the Yulan continent died. Would he necessarily save Linley? I find it quite surprising that he even warned us. Tarasi had a very clear memory of Beirut's ruthless viciousness. Not necessarily so. Dylan didn't share the same opinion. So that's how it all went down. Linley secretly sighed. No wonder after he had mentally reached out to Bibi hadn't told him if Beirut would be able to come, so Beirut had gone to the necropolis of the gods and wasn't even in the forest of darkness. Nobody noticed. A few kilometers away from Dragonblood Castle, a translucent human figure was hovering in mid-air, absorbing all the sunlight which shone down on him. When something absorbed all light, then it naturally would become invisible. That kid, Tarasi. The invisible man snorted self-mockingly. It seems the actions that I took during the Apocalypse Wars all those years ago had truly terrified him. He really thinks I'm as ruthless and as vicious as that. And then, the translucent person disappeared. At the borders of the forest of darkness. Bibi, don't go. You won't be of any use at Dragonblood Castle. Can you beat a full god? The three violet gold rat kings were persuading Bibi, but Bibi had made up his mind. He hurriedly flew towards the south, his heart filled with panic. But just at this moment. Bibi, I'm fine. Linley's voice rang out in Bibi's mind. Boss. Bibi instantly halted, overjoyed. The three nearby violet gold rat kings were extremely mystified as Bibi halted in mid-air and spoke spiritually with Linley. Only after a long while did the conversation end. Boss, I'm heading to your place right now. Bibi truly wanted to see Linley right now. Nobody could stop him. Bibi, a gravelly voice rang out. Bibi raised his head, his beady little eyes instantly filling with a hint of unhappiness. Grandpa Beirut, you only came back now. Lord Father. The three violet gold rat kings behaved very properly. Beirut smiled as he reached out, wanting to hug Bibi. Bibi, come here. But Bibi dodged aside. Humph, Grandpa Beirut, I learned from the boss that you knew that the boss was in trouble. Why didn't you personally intervene? If you personally intervened, that Ajwin bastard would have died, no question about it. Bibi was extremely dissatisfied. Ajwin had nearly killed Linley. In Bibi's mind, although Beirut made him feel extremely proud and he truly liked his grandpa Beirut very much, to Bibi, nobody was more important than Linley, who had grown up along with him since they were children. In much the same way, in Linley's heart, Bibi was also extremely important. How many years had Linley and Bibi traveled alone, just the two of them? A human youth with no parents, and a magical beast with no parents. They had joked with each other, adventured together, and slowly grown up together. The bond between them was tough and unbreakable. Bibi. Me, personally kill that Ajwin. Beirut laughed with resignation. I can't personally get involved in everything, right? As for killing Ajwin and getting revenge, it's best to let Linley handle that. It's enough for me to save his life. It was Tarasi and Dylan who saved my boss' life. Bibi turned his head around unhappily, ignoring Beirut. Staring at Bibi, Beirut didn't know what to say. He, Beirut, was an extremely famous person, even amongst the high-level figures of the countless planes of the universe. His ruthless and viciousness was the stuff of legend. Even towards his own children, Beirut could be ruthless. But, towards Bibi, Beirut's heart was filled with doting love. It was much like how parents could be stern with their children, but would be indulgent towards their grandchildren. Beirut was exceedingly strict with his children, but meeting this descendant of his Beirut clan, Bibi, the second god-eater rat to ever exist in the countless planes of the universe, he simply couldn't be strict. Tarasi and Dalin. Beirut shook his head. Bibi, actually, I already arrived at Dragon Blood Castle long before they did, traveling at high speed. If they hadn't been able to make it in time, I would have intervened. Beirut coaxed Bibi, as though he were coaxing a little child. Bibi looked somewhat suspiciously at Beirut. Truly? Of course it's true. Since when has Grandpa ever lied to you? Beirut's smile was so very benevolent. Bibi immediately began to grin. Right, Grandpa Beirut, I want to pay a visit to Dragon Blood Castle. Bibi immediately said. Fine. Beirut beamed at him. You should go take a look, but Bibi, you need to remember that you are very close to your final transformation and reaching adulthood. After making a visit, come back quickly. Beirut instructed him solemnly. Got it, Grandpa Beirut. Bibi replied. Harry, go alongside Bibi. Beirut instructed, not entirely at ease. Yes, Lord Father. The Violet Gold Rat King, Harry, said. Grandpa Beirut, Harry doesn't have to come, right? If I meet with any deities that come to act against me, Harry won't be able to protect me. This is what Bibi said, because as Bibi saw it, the Violet Gold Rat King, Harry, was nothing more than a saint-level magical beast. Hearing this, Harry couldn't help but exchange glances with his two brothers, the other two Violet Gold Rat Kings, Hart and Harvey. Harry, go with him. Beirut couldn't be bothered to say much more. And then, Bibi and Harry headed off towards Dragon Blood Castle together. To the war god and the high priest, the sudden descent of so many experts into the Yulan continent was an extremely disastrous piece of news. Still, they were forced to accept it. Linley, Olivier, Dalin, Tarasi, Caesar, the war god, the high priest, this group of people were clustered together in the main hall of Dragon Blood Castle. Just as they were chatting amongst each other. Whoosh! A human figure suddenly flew over at high speed. It was Fane. Just now, because of Ojwin's arrival, Linley had ordered his family and friends to immediately flee in every direction. Now, they were slowly making their way back. The first one to arrive was Fane. When Fane landed in the main hall, he saw the war god, O'Brien, and was instantly stunned. Bang! Fane's knees crashed to the ground. Master! Fane's eyes were already filled with tears. My fellow disciples are all dead, and the honorary disciples are dead as well. The entire war god mountain has been destroyed. Your disciple has failed Master's trust. Fane sobbed bitterly. The pain he felt in his heart, upon seeing his master, the war god, completely burst out. The war god hurriedly moved towards him, personally raising his first disciple to his feet. Fane, this has nothing to do with you. Nothing to do with you. The war god let out a single sigh. War god Mountain had held all of his life's work, but with so many deities having descended, he understood that his disciple, Fane, merely a prime saint, didn't have any chance to defend at all. Master! From mid-air, multiple human figures flashed forward. It was Dixie and the others. Dixie and the others also directly knelt down before the high priest. Rise, all of you. The high priest said with a sigh. Her situation was actually much better than the war gods, because the people who had taken over the Yulan Empire had attacked the imperial palace. In addition, the disciples of the high priest weren't centered on any particular location, and so only the two who were in the imperial palace had died. Most of the high priest's disciples were still alive. However, the Yulan Empire which the high priest had guarded for 10,000 years had been taken over. Many people hurried over, one after the other, including Linley's original body, which directly merged into his divine clone. Linley. As soon as she came back, Delia embraced Linley, feeling worried for him. "You are okay? That's wonderful." Delia's eyes were filled with unshed tears. When Ajwin had arrived, all of them had been forced to hide in that pocket dimension. Afterwards, they had fled in every direction. Linley's original body was worried that the enemy would focus on his aura and focus on seizing him, so he hadn't permitted any others to flee with him in the same direction. At that time, everyone's heart was filled with terror. But now, everyone could set their minds at ease. Everything is fine now. Linley felt somewhat relaxed as well. Before this, an enormous weight had been crushing down upon Linley, who had been the only one to bear it. But now, Dylan and Tarasi had come. With the two of them, unless that Lord Atkins personally acted against them, Linley's side was now more than capable of protecting themselves, at least. "Linley, do you know who it was that destroyed my war god mountain?" The war god looked at Linley. The war god's eyes held a trace of an unwillingness to accept this. Linley sighed as he spoke. "War god, forget it. The people who destroyed your war god mountain and took over the O'Brien Empire are an extremely powerful force. Their leader is a high god. His name is Atkins." Ever since learning that Atkins was a high god, he had never again entertained the notion of the war god seizing back the O'Brien Empire. "Atkins!" Dylan let out a shocked cry. Having stayed in the Gebados Planar Prison, Dylan knew how terrifying Atkins was. High god. Tarasi, Caesar, the war god, the high priest, and the others all had changed looks on their faces. It was already very hard to go from being a demigod to a full god, but the difficult level of advancing from god to high god was even more ridiculous. To them, a high god was invincible. After all, sovereigns wouldn't pay attention to ordinary deities. Sovereigns couldn't be bothered to act against them, and so high gods naturally became the top of the mountain. So Atkins made it out as well. That makes sense. He belongs to Blue Fire City. Dylan let out an emotional sigh. Who knows if Lord Bluefire was able to flee out as well. Dylan also knew of the terrifying power of Bluefire, one of the 5 great kings. A king amongst the most powerful of high gods. Although Atkins was powerful, in front of Bluefire, he had to lower his noble head and submit to him. "Haha," the war god laughed self-mockingly. "So a high god is actually interested in occupying my O'Brien Empire." The war god's laugh contained helplessness in it. Although the war god had made improvements in the necropolis of the gods, he was still just a demigod. "Linley, do you know who took over my Yulan Empire?" The high priest's gentle voice rang out. Linley still remembered what Muba had told him. He immediately replied, "High priest, the person who destroyed the imperial palace of the Yulan Empire and took it over was a full god named Urf." "A full god?" The high priest frowned. Everyone present had improved over the course of this trip to the necropolis of the gods, and Dylan had broken through from peak demigod level and entered the god level. The high priest had been lucky enough to acquire a single god-level divine spark. As for Caesar and the war god, although they hadn't acquired divine sparks, they had acquired divine artifacts. A god who was able to survive in the Gebados Planar Prison is no ordinary god. Dylan said with a frown. "I imagine that for now, it's best for us to not make too many enemies. For now, let's make this Barak Empire our base. Together, at least we'll be able to protect our foundation, the Barak Empire." The war god and the high priest hesitated for a moment, then nodded as well. Book 13, Gebados, Chapter 11, Desri's Divine Spark. Linley and the others understood one point: if one wanted to occupy a large territory, one had to have an equivalent amount of power. The side occupying the Yulan Empire was led by a full god, Urf. However, how many gods did Urf's side have? Was it just Urf? For now, they couldn't be sure. It must be known that the Yulan Empire, in size and population, vastly exceeded that of the Barak Empire. The Yulan Empire and O'Brien Empire remain the two largest empires of the Yulan continent. Urfa's side definitely was not weaker than Ojwin's, for them to dare take over the Yulan Empire. Even Ojwin had two divine god clones and was able to fight Tarasi to a standstill. How could Linley's side dare to go irritate that Urf? Catherine, for now, hurry up and fuse that god-level divine spark. Tarasi instructed. Dylan, you need to train hard as well and gain insights on how to apply the laws in your attacks, so as to raise your combat ability in a short period of time. The High Priest and Dylan both nodded. Lord Beirut just opened the necropolis of the gods. He shouldn't open it again in the near future, therefore, the current situation with many deities causing chaos will continue here in the Yulan continent for a fairly long period of time. Tarasi said. As for us, what we need to do is to quietly train. If others don't bother us, we won't bother them. If others do want to deal with us though, then we don't need to be merciful to them either. Tarasi's eyes had a cold look flash past them. Enough. I'm going to pay a visit to the imperial capital of the Barak Empire. If Ojwin is there, I'll kick him out. Tarasi said. Actually, during their battle just now, Tarasi hadn't used his full force. After all, for Tarasi to be capable of becoming the controller of the lower 11 floors of the necropolis of the gods meant that Tarasi had extraordinary abilities of his own. Lord Tarasi, I'm worried about one thing. Linley spoke out. Speak. Tarasi laughed as he looked at Linley. Linley frowned. Will that Adkins charge over to kill us at this place? After having experienced Ojwin's attack, Linley began to worry. Originally, he thought that Ojwin, having taken over his empire, wouldn't attack Dragon Blood Castle. After all, Linley had never attacked him. Who would have imagined that Ojwin had indeed attacked? This caused Linley to worry that one day, if Adkins had the desire, he too would come to deal with them. That would be terrible. Don't worry. Dylan laughed. Linley, high gods have their own pride. If you don't go irritate a high god generally won't lower themselves to deal with you. Generally speaking, even full gods won't lower themselves to deal with you, much less high gods. In the world of deities, there was this custom. Only deities of the same level and status would fight each other. For example, as long as a demigod wasn't so hot-headed as to go irritate a god, the god wouldn't go kill him. But of course, if one violated the god's will or irritated him somehow, the god wouldn't show mercy either. For example, Beirut had given the order that deities and saints were not permitted to engage in slaughter or cause destruction in the 18 northern duchies. If deities came over despite that, then Beirut would naturally reveal some of his power, like how he directly killed those demigods with one palm slap. High gods were definitely capable of killing demigods with a single palm slap. After all, the difference in power was enormous. That's good. Linley felt relieved as well. At the same time, he thought back to the scene of how, when Ojwin had arrived, Ojwin hadn't actively attacked him either. Clearly, he disdained from doing so, and instead had his subordinates attack. This was the situation in places where experts were common. For example, if two sides were engaging in warfare, the leaders would fight the leaders, while the soldiers would fight the soldiers. Tarasi, be careful when dealing with Ojwin. Dylan smirked. Don't end up getting beaten by Ojwin instead. What a joke. Tarasi immediately snickered. What do you take me for? A new god like you who is easily bullied. After speaking, Tarasi gave Dylan no face at all, immediately flying out of Dragon Blood Castle's main hall and towards the imperial capital at high speed. Jerk. Dylan cursed softly. Linley looked at the experts nearby, a smile hovering on his face. Now that everyone was fine and that Dragon Blood Castle returned to its normal tranquility, Linley felt a sense of contentment in his heart. He raised his head towards the sky, staring at it through main hall's door. BB is about to arrive. Boss, How about, you come live with me in the forest of darkness? Bibi suggested. Don't worry, Grandpa Beirut definitely won't stop me from bringing you all over. When the time comes, you, me, and Taylor and the others will all live in the forest of darkness. I don't think anyone would dare go to the forest of darkness. This was Bibi's idea. After Ajwin's attack, Bibi was beginning to worry as well. Don't worry. There are no longer any problems. Linley laughed. Tarasi and Dylan have already arrived, and they are all full gods. With them present, at least gods aren't able to threaten us now. As for that Adkins, as I see it, he has no reason to come deal with me, a demigod. Bibi thought about it, then agreed that Linley made sense. If Adkins wanted to kill Linley, even if Linley decided to live in the forest of darkness, Adkins could wait for when Beirut wasn't present, then head over. In addition, would he, a high god, lower himself to deal with a demigod? But I have to say, this time things really did get quite dangerous. It was an extremely close one. Linley sighed with feeling. If it hadn't been for Dylan acting at just the critical moment, himself and Olivier probably would have been finished. What was the danger? Bibi rebutted. Actually, Grandpa Beirut arrived at Dragon Blood Castle before they did. Only, my Grandpa Beirut couldn't be bothered to act if not necessary. If Dylan and the others hadn't made it in time, though, Grandpa Beirut definitely would have intervened. Linley couldn't help but feel surprised. If Grandpa had not intervened at the critical moment, even in death I would no longer recognize him as my grandpa. Bibi said somewhat angrily. Your Grandpa Beirut is also a high god after all, and I've heard that he is a sovereign's emissary. Given his status, how could he so casually intervene? Linley spoke out on Beirut's behalf. Bibi let out 2 sniffs, then no longer spoke. After all, Bibi still liked Grandpa Beirut very much. He could feel Beirut's love for him. But Bibi, having never met his parents, naturally was closest to Linley. Linley secretly said to himself, so Lord Beirut really did arrive early on. Only, he didn't intervene. It seems that Lord Beirut simply watched as Desri's divine clone perished. Linley was beginning to understand. Beirut was a very proud person. Desri's life and death, Oliver's life and death, Beirut probably wouldn't care about at all. It was only because of Bibi that Beirut was somewhat willing to take care of Linley. Within the forest of darkness. I've told you to work hard on training in the elemental laws of the earth, the elemental laws of fire, and the elemental laws of water, these 3 laws. But you, if you keep acting like this, even after 100 million years, you still won't be able to become high gods. Beirut stared at the 2 violet gold rat kings in front of him. The 2 violet gold rat kings didn't dare to make a sound. Alas. I suppose I can't blame you. Beirut shook his head and sighed. You are more proficient in the elemental laws of the wind and the elemental laws of darkness. Training in the other 3 types of laws, you are indeed too slow, too slow. Father. One of the 2 violet gold rat kings, Harvey, spoke out. I've trained for over 1,000,000 years, but, I haven't reached the deity level in the earth, fire, or water elements. Honestly, I feel so tired when I train in them. It is completely different from when I train in the laws of darkness or the elemental laws of the wind. It feels so relaxing when I train in those. Forget it. Do what you want. Beirut shook his head. Actually, I already have many things. I shouldn't be so greedy. That child, Bibi. A hint of a resigned smile was on Beirut's face. In his heart, I'm not as important to him as that Linley. He doesn't realize that even if he didn't ask me for help, just based on how Linley had taken care of him for so long, I wouldn't just stand there and watch as Linley died. However, I have limits as to how much I can help him. Even someone as powerful as a high god wasn't capable of teleportation. For example, Beirut. Although his divine sense might tell him that tens of thousands of kilometers away, someone was trying to kill Linley, at such a distance, despite being fast, it would take him some time to get there. If he, Beirut, wasn't able to make it in time, he would be helpless to act as Linley was killed. Hart, Harvey, the two of you, as well as your older brother, Harry. I don't want to say anything else. You can choose your own path. If you truly are unable to take the path that I have arranged for you, then you can do as you please. Only, don't regret it in the future. Yes, Father. Hart and Harvey exchanged glances, a hint of delight in their eyes. Seeing this, Beirut couldn't help but let out a sigh. Sometimes, the road which the elders had arranged clearly was the correct one, but if the children such as Hart and Harvey didn't like it, what could he do? Dragonblood Castle. A human figure flew through the air at high speed, landing within Dragonblood Castle. Soon, under the guidance of a maid, the person was led to Linley's training area. "Oh, Miller. Come in." Linley's voice rang out from within the western gardens. A few days ago, Tarasi had already forced Ajwin to retreat. Leading his subordinates, Ajwin had fled away from the borders of the Barak Empire. Tarasi, Dalan, the war god, and the others all lived in the East Gardens. Dragonblood Castle was an extremely large place, and there was no problem at all finding places for people to live. With so many experts all in one place, even Ajwin didn't dare come again. And although Olivier was very self-confident, he knew when to advance and when to retreat. Now that Ajwin had sworn to kill him, Olivier naturally remained in Dragonblood Castle. However, Desri did not. The day of the battle, Desri's original body had fled with the others. Linley had also mentally spoken to him to return, but who would have imagined that although the others had returned, Desri hadn't come back to Dragonblood Castle. He returned to his secret mountain village instead. Lord Linley. Miller immediately bowed upon entering, then said urgently, "Lord Linley, please make a trip with me. Right now, Lord Desri is in very bad shape." "What's wrong?" Linley frowned. Miller laughed bitterly. Ever since a few days ago, Lord Desri returned, then shut himself into his study and refused to allow anyone to disturb him. At the time, we all felt the look on Lord Desri's face was off. Madame Penslin went to speak with him as well, but she was cursed out and forced to leave by Lord Desri. Cursed? Linley was shocked. Right. Lord Desri has a very good temper. He has never cursed the madam before. In addition, the madam also sensed that Lord Desri seems to be in very bad shape and is very frustrated. Miller said hurriedly. "Let's go. I'll make a trip with you." Linley didn't hesitate. Linley hadn't imagined that the setback would change Desri so much. From his own perspective, if Linley had lost his divine wind clone, Linley wouldn't be so explosive and despondent. He would just grit his teeth, then begin training in another elemental law. After all, at least he would have been alive. Within the mountains. The mountain residence. Linley and Miller were walking together. "Third bro, you came." Seeing Linley, Reynolds revealed a hint of a smile. Reynolds was much more mature than he had been in the past as well. However, at present, Reynolds was still only an archmagus of the 9th rank. He hadn't been able to make it into the saint level yet. "Linley, go take a look. Desri isn't willing to see anyone right now. From the looks of it, he doesn't seem to be training either. I don't know what he's thinking about." Penslin walked over, a bitter smile on her face. Linley nodded slightly. Linley understood something. It seems Desri hasn't told his friends and family about the destruction of his divine clone yet. Under Penslin's guidance, Linley immediately headed off, arriving in front of a closed study. The door to the study opened with a push. Seeing Desri seated cross-legged there, Linley was very shocked. Was this the same graceful, refined Desri he had known? Book 13, Gebados, Chapter 12, Desri's Decision. Of gentle temperament, with a smile ever present on his face. This was the image of Desri which Linley had in his mind. But right now, Desri's hair was disheveled, and his entire body emanated a brutal aura. Even when Desri noticed Linley's arrival, he hadn't changed his aura at all. "You came," Desri said calmly. Linley secretly sighed. The destruction of his divine clone had apparently truly been a major blow to Desri's psyche. "Desri, it's useless to feel regret over the destruction of your divine clone. Right now, what you can do is work hard and think about your future path. The way you are right now, so frustrated that you aren't even talking to family and friends, keeping everything bottled up inside, will make your family and friends feel worried about you," Linley urged. Desri was silent for a moment. "When I came back, my mind was in a state of chaos. I didn't want to speak with them." Desri spoke. Linley nodded slightly. Desri and Linley were different. After all, Desri had worked hard for over 5,000 years to become a deity. The results of his 5,000 years of effort had disappeared in one day. Nobody would at first be able to accept something like that with perfect calm. "Desri, what's your decision?" Linley sighed as he asked. "Are you going to train in other elemental laws to become a deity on your own, or find a divine demigod spark and fuse with it to become a deity?" By this point, Desri had no other options. Desri let out a self-mocking laugh. "Train in other elemental laws." Desri looked at Linley. "Linley, I was most skilled at the elemental laws of light, but even so, it took me a very long period of time to become a deity. If I were to change to other elemental laws, it would take me over 10,000 years. Tell me, how can I possibly become a deity on my own again?" Linley was silent for a moment. Linley understood that every person had their own strong points and specialties. For example, if Linley were forced to train in the elemental laws of darkness, which he knew nothing about, even if he spent 10 times or 100 times the amount of effort, his achievements in the elemental laws of darkness still wouldn't reach the level of his elemental laws of the wind. Half the effort for twice the results, double the effort for half the results. There was a huge difference between the two. "Desri, I know that you have the most aptitude for the elemental laws of light," Linley said solemnly. "That divine spark of yours was seized by that silver-robed man serving Ajwin. Don't worry. I will definitely come up with a way to seize that divine spark back for you. If Desri's original body were to fuse with his own divine spark, then he would be able to succeed in a very short period of time." But Linley also understood that it was hard to say as to whether or not that silver-robed man would show himself again. "If I'm not able to find your divine spark, then I will come up with a way to find another light-style divine spark," Linley said. As Linley saw it, originally, when Ajwin had attacked, Desri had given him great face by not immediately retreating, which resulted in his divine clone being destroyed. Desri originally had a future in the light-style laws, but now, his only choice was to choose fusing with a divine spark to become a deity again. He, Linley, had to help him. "No need," Desri said with unwavering determination. Linley couldn't help but feel startled. What did this Desri want? Could it be that he himself, relying on his power as a prime saint, would go seize a divine spark? "I don't want to train in the elemental laws of light any longer." Desri looked at Linley and sighed. "Linley, after multiple battles, I've discovered that training in spiritual attacks is quite disadvantageous in battles. I want to train in mysterious truths that are of use in close combat." "Close combat?" Linley was somewhat surprised. He hadn't expected that Desri would actually decide to change his path of training. But it made sense. After becoming a deity, Desri had engaged in 2 major battles, the first time against Beaumont, the second time against the silver-robed man who Ajwin commanded. Desri had realized, that solely relying on spiritual attacks was greatly disadvantageous in battle. Although the soul was extremely important, close quarters, physical attacks were more effective. If that's the case, Linley came to a decision. With the flip of his hand, Linley retrieved a black divine spark out of nowhere, which was currently emanating a deathly aura. Desri couldn't help but look at the divine spark. "Linley, what is this?" But Desri could tell what it was as well. Linley nodded slightly. "Right. This is the divine spark which I got when we killed Beaumont. This divine spark's nature is of the edicts of death. In training, aside from the 7 elemental laws, there are also the 4 edicts. The edicts of death include both strong spiritual attacks as well as strong close combat abilities. Fuse with it, research it, and break through. You should be able to have some accomplishments." Desri hesitated slightly. Actually, right now, Desri very much wanted this divine spark. Only, divine sparks were simply too precious. Linley had been the one to kill Beaumont, and so the divine spark naturally went to him. "Take it." Linley was naturally able to tell what Desri was thinking. He tossed the divine spark directly to Desri, who unconsciously caught it. As his hand clasped around the divine spark, Desri's eyes began to shine. Now that he had a divine spark, becoming a deity again was nothing more than a matter of time. "Thank you." Desri only said these 2 words to Linley. Linley smiled. "Desri, as I see it, it's best if you come to Dragonblood Castle to train. Currently, Tarasi and Dylan are both there. It is fairly safe there. As for this place, I'm worried that deities might discover that you are fusing with a divine spark. They might come and steal it from you." Desri nodded in agreement. In the current Yulon continent, there were many deities present. Even though he was training within the mountain, Desri wouldn't be able to avoid the divine sense of a deity. Most likely, the vast majority of deities would be willing to kill Desri, a mere prime saint, for the sake of acquiring a divine spark. When Desri came out, Penslin, Reynolds, and the others all let out a sigh of relief. This time, Desri clearly explained what happened to Penslin. Only now did Penslin know that her husband had actually lost his divine spark. No wonder he had been like that. For the sake of safety, Penslin and the others all decided to go with Desri to Dragonblood Castle as well. Dragonblood Castle's interior was extremely spacious. It wouldn't even be a problem if thousands of people came. Linley was very happy as well, because this meant that Reynolds would also be living at Dragonblood Castle. The 2 brothers would once again be able to often drink and chat together. Meanwhile, after Ojwin's forces had been pushed out of the Barak Empire, the other deities who lay hidden in the Yulon continent, seeing that even the full god, Ojwin, had been sent fleeing, didn't dare to dream of taking over the Barak Empire for themselves. The Barak Empire slowly returned to normal. Linley's side remained in Dragonblood Castle, training contentedly, but Ojwin's forces, who had been sent fleeing, couldn't be so relaxed. In a small town near the borders of the O'Brien Empire, the exalted god, Ojwin, was hiding here for now. Currently, the O'Brien Empire was Lord Adkin's territory. No matter how daring Ojwin was, he wouldn't dare try to take Adkin's territory from him. Recently, his lordship has been in an unstable mood. Kingsley died. No wonder his lordship is acting like this. A silver-robed man was chatting with a black-robed man. In recent days, almost no one dared to go disturb Ojwin. They would wait for Ojwin to give them orders, and then they would carry them out. Ojwin was currently seated in front of his desk, drinking 1 cup of wine after another, his gaze unsettled. Clearly, he was thinking about something. Olivier. The more Ojwin thought about it, the more his body naturally emitted that baleful aura. He truly wanted to kill Olivier. If I don't kill Olivier, I'll never be at ease. Ojwin's fiery rage continued to smolder. But that Tarasi's strength is simply too astonishing. Even if I were to fight against him at full strength, I would probably still be at a disadvantage. With both him and Dylan both remaining in Dragon Blood Castle, how will I kill Olivier? Ojwin was a man of great ambition. He was able to endure, while at the same time, wasn't willing to subordinate himself to others. Through the countless years he had spent in the Gebados Planar Prison, Ojwin had only two goals he had pursued: to reach the greatest heights of power and authority, and to protect his son. He didn't casually decide to offend others. In the Planar Prison, he had known quite a few experts, most of whom he was on good terms with. He was able to gain quite a bit of fame in Blue Fire City, while at the same time, Ojwin continually pursued the goal of becoming a high god. A high god was simply far more powerful than a god could ever be. Now that his son was dead, Ojwin wanted to seek revenge. At the same time, he still had the goal of becoming a high god. First, revenge. Ojwin stared towards the southwest. But by myself, it is impossible for me to go to Dragon Blood Castle and kill Olivier when he is being protected by Tarasi and Dylan. It seems, I'll have to make this choice. Ojwin didn't like subordinating himself to others. But now, he decided to do so. Urf has something of a grudge against me. If I go serve Lord Atkins, at least that Hanbrit Hanbuletin Li who serves him is on good terms with me. In that place, I'll be able to quickly establish myself. It shouldn't be too hard for me to gain revenge by relying on Lord Atkins' power. Ojwin's gaze turned as cold and as sharp as a knife. Olivier. I will definitely kill him. I will destroy his soul and scatter his spirit. Ojwin ground his teeth. The imperial capital of the O'Brien Empire. The imperial palace. The imperial clan who had been in the imperial palace had been exterminated long ago. This was now the place where Lord Atkins lived. Atkins had a few hobbies. He liked wearing extravagant clothes, he likes to sample some precious, rare foods, and he liked to watch beautiful women dance. He held a wine cup in his right hand, as jade white as that of a woman's. He took a gentle sip of the wine, smiling calmly as he watched the many women dancing within the flowers in front of him. Right now, in the rear flower gardens, the youth with short silver hair was currently leading the way for Ojwin. Don't be hasty. Lord Atkins is currently enjoying himself. At a time like this, Lord Atkins hates it when others disturb him. The youth with short silver hair explained. Ojwin nodded and laughed. I've heard as well that when Lord Atkins was in Blue Fire City, he liked to enjoy himself. Only someone as exalted as Lord Atkins was capable of enjoying himself like that in a place like the Gebados Planar Prison. The silver-haired youth laughed as well. Others had been tormented in the Planar Prison, but someone as mighty as Atkins enjoyed his time there. Come in. A voice rang out in their minds. The silver-haired youth immediately led Ojwin into the rear flower gardens. Upon arriving in front of Atkins, Ojwin immediately knelt on one knee with respect. I pay my respects to the exalted, mighty Lord Atkins. Ojwin lowered his head. Atkins, seated on his chair, glanced sideways at him. Ojwin? Right, I heard that a while ago, you were in the Barak Empire. Atkins said with a smile. My strength was inferior to another's, and so I had to depart the Barak Empire. Ojwin still didn't dare to lift his head. Although he was now joining Atkins' side, Ojwin didn't dare to ask Atkins for help. He knew that to a high god, whether or not he accepted another god in his entourage didn't make much of a difference at all. You can rise. Atkins said calmly. From today onwards, you can stay in this imperial palace as well. If there's anything I need, I'll send you orders. Yes, Lord Atkins. Ojwin felt relieved. He knew that now that he was serving Atkins, at least Atkins would protect him. Ojwin, you can go for now. Atkins said. Yes, Lord. Ojwin left respectfully. Atkins glanced at the nearby silver-haired youth. Hanbrit, from what I know, when those people who had gone to the necropolis of the gods came back, that Beirut should have returned to the forest of darkness. How about this, you send a subordinate to make a trip to the forest of darkness? You don't need me to tell you what the purpose is, right? Yes, Lord. The silver-haired youth, Hanbrit, said respectfully. Adkins stared towards the northeast, and then he laughed. He drained the remaining wine in his cup in one gulp.